And then, so a couple clicks, Vivian, if you don't mind. And then the next item up is confirm that we have a quorum. And Sam, just to triple check there, but it looks like we do have a quorum.
Yep, we do.
Perfect. And then I know it's been a while since our last meeting, but just in case there were any concerns with the last minutes that we sent out from our last meeting back in October, were there any corrections or input on the last meeting minutes? Okay, and hearing none, we'll go for our last one more click, Vivian. And then for today's agenda, those in the room have it printed out and we've sent it out online. Anything to add or anything anyone sees missing on the agenda that they wanted to add? Okay, all right. Well, I think that does it. If there's anything that anyone has, again, please feel free to use the chat, or we will, see people in the room and coordinate things as we need. So with that, I will turn things over to Director Gibbs.
Great. Thanks, Russ. Really appreciate everyone participating today that's able to be here in person, as well as those that are online as well. This is our first IBCC meeting in person, believe it or not, since a couple of years ago, last March, 2 Marches ago, I believe. And that meeting, Russ and I were catching up. I think that was March 4th, kind of in the Denver kind of Jeffco area. And obviously, a lot has changed. Things are starting to open up. I was just actually at the governor's mansion to celebrate Black History Month last night, and was talking to some folks that were there 2 years ago. And at that event, there were probably about 200 people there. This event, just last night, there were about 40 people there. And so I say that because I recognize everyone's comfort level is a little bit different as things are starting to open up. We will be meeting in person is really, my preference. I feel like, whether or not we meet but have lunch and dinner and maybe share a beer together, that's kind of my style as we tackle some of the challenging topics that we're going to be working on, is to really work with you all in person. The pandemic has been very real for a lot of people. I know for the Department of Natural Resources, we've had people that have died of COVID. I've personally had friends that have been impacted and have died as well. But we're getting in a better stage. And I don't know exactly, I'm not a doctor, but, when you look at the numbers, we're looking much, much better. And we're really opening things up now for having meetings in person. But just thinking of COVID and how things have changed over the last few years, a few things really haven't changed. We see a lot of new people moving to Colorado still. At one point, we saw about 70 to 80,000 new people moving to the state. The most recent state demographer numbers reflect that we're going to see, less people actually moving than previously we thought. But still, we're going to expect about 1.8 million more people moving to the state by 2050. And that brings a lot of challenges, obviously, when we're talking about water. Also, since March of 2000, Colorado has experienced 2 consecutive years of extreme drought. We've had one of the worst 20+ year drought periods experienced by the region since AD 800, believe it or not, which is hard to imagine. And then since our meeting in person from 2 years ago, we also experienced, by every account imaginable, our worst wildfire season ever, where we saw over 400,000 acres burn just from the Grizzly Creek and East Troublesome fires. We also saw, Pine Gulch fire north of Grand Junction, and Grizzly Creek fire that closed I-70 for weeks. And then more recently, we saw, the Marshall fire that burned and destroyed over 1,000 homes. And that's real. And actually, just on my way here this morning, I listened to the radio that has said, hey, we're going to experience more continuing challenges with wildfires, in the future. So I bring this up because it's definitely a little bit different world from 2020 of March. And, you know, I really believe that, especially in my new role as IBCC chairman, that, you know, we want this group to be functioning in high capacity, to be working well together. And I really want you all to dig deep. I really want you to look at yourself in the mirror and to ask yourself, do you have the time commitment to really put into this? I'm probably one of the more busier people that I know in Colorado. The governor is probably busier than me, but to give you a snapshot about my life is, you know, I'm married with 2 little kids, a 4-year-old and a 7-year-old. I don't even live in Denver. I live in Breckenridge. I travel the state constantly. There's 3 other meetings I should probably be at right now, including a wolf meeting in Glenwood Springs, which, by the way, I'm glad I'm here and not that wolf meeting. But you get the picture that, you know, we all have a lot of things going on. But I'm here today physically with you because I made this commitment to the governor and to the state of Colorado to give it all that I have, to be the chair of this group, to really work to try to find common ground. I've been busy, you know, studying the Basin implementation plans that are in this file and really trying to find where we can have that sweet spot that we all want to have, that we can all work together. You know, I've had some individual conversations with many of you, and some of you are like, hey, you know, you look around this room or you look at who's on Zoom, and we have some of the leading water experts, you know, in the state. You are the cream of the crop. You're the best that we have right now. And I want to make sure that we're going to do everything we can do to make sure your time is useful, is that you're adding a lot to the equation of what we need for you to accomplish, what we need to accomplish together for the state of Colorado. I believe strongly that there's no substitute to bringing people together. And we're going to work really hard to try to have meetings in person. I recognize today is kind of a challenging day. Melly, you know, I don't know how you made it over Wolf Creek Pass and then some, and then Grand County yesterday to be here. But and I recognize everyone's comfort level too is a little bit different depending on COVID and so forth. But for the folks that know on Zoom, you know, we're socially distanced. We're within city and county Denver area where there's no mask mandates, so we're going to follow what the local public health mask mandates look like. We also have COVID tests for folks that want to use a test. It's not mandatory, but we're making that all available for you. I'm really excited too, not only for this meeting, but for our future meetings. Please put on your calendar for June 30th. That will be our next meeting that we're going to have in my home county of Summit County, where that's also the same day that we're going to release the draft for public comment of the water plan. And really hope that meeting will be a day not only to kind of get work done and roll up our sleeves, but also part celebration in that, you know, we're emerging from the pandemic and the hopefully long snowy winter that we're going to have. At least we're cold temperatures here. But again, you're represented either by the governor or by your roundtables to represent your interest, to bring ideas here to the table, but also bring the ideas and everything that we discuss here back to discuss these intrastate solutions to our biggest water challenges. So I hope that you're all excited as I am to really roll up your sleeves. You know, I'm wearing my boots and jeans today because, you know, we're getting down to work today. And just, I'm really grateful, honestly, that you're putting the time in to tackle some of these challenging issues. And I want to use the most, we want to be thoughtful about your time. I want to harness your ideas and really move that into action. So I know we have a long schedule, you know, agenda before us, and we're gonna get out of here by 12:30. Any questions for me before we turn it over to you all to give your Basin Roundtable updates? Okay, let me turn it over to you all. And I know that we also have governor appointees, but I ask, let's focus on the folks that represent roundtables for right now. And turn it over to you all next. So let's maybe start with who's in the room. How about South Platte? or you can yield to Stan if you want.
Is Jim on Zoomy thing or?
Yeah. Jim's on Zoom. Or Jim, you wanna?
Go ahead, Sean. You're in the room. I apologize. I was supposed to be in the room, and I between snow and the -4 degrees and feeding cattle, I just couldn't get out the door this morning. So sorry about that. I wanted to be present in person because I really appreciate your willingness to have in-person meetings. Hope we can. So, Sean, if you want to update them since you're in the room, and then I'll fill in if I need to.
Yeah, Jim was supposed to be my +1, and my whole reason of driving was I said, well, Jim's going to be there. So turns out I could have. Sean Cronin with the South Platte Basin Roundtable. We've been having virtual meetings as everybody else, and certainly challenging to try to create the dialogue that Director Gibbs was talking about with regards to having some interesting conversations. Obviously, the Basin Implementation Plan is a subject that has been routine on the agenda. And then you may have heard that there's been a state that made some noise about South Platte water. So that's created a little bit of interest. And then recently there was a bill proposed about funding to the South Platte. So there's never a shortage of topics. Even when you think we've talked about everything, there's new things that come up. So I think the roundtable is really looking forward to getting back in person and being able to see each other and break bread and talk about things that we need to be really moving ahead. Obviously, the South Platte has been the center of a lot of different water projects. And I think since we last got together, the Chimney Hollow project had gotten its final permit and went to construction. And so that's certainly a big deal in the South Platte. And if you've not been out there or saw their videos and you do happen to be in the area, I would highly recommend going on a tour that Northern puts on, and they'll take anybody really anytime. They just got bands going out there constantly, and it is an incredible construction project. And thank you, West Slope, for that.
Awesome. Great. Yeah, thanks, Sean. Jim, anything you want to add?
I just touch on Nebraska just a little bit, and because I just had some information sent to me. You know, the governor went to their legislature and was trying to get some funding to do a project to use some water that's within their compact entitlement. And just here recently, the legislature approved some money for feasibility of the project. So that is good because I don't think it's feasible. So once they look at the water availability and what they have to do to get it, and they have to run in the wintertime, and we get the first 35,000, and they look at all these things, I think they're going to find that, and it says in the compact that it's for irrigation. I just think that they might decide that it probably isn't feasible. So we'll see what happens, but you know, on the South Platte compact, it only affects the lower section of the river, which is District 64. So that's just the last 75 miles of the river. So it's right downstream of the Pruitt Inlet. So both my reservoirs are unaffected by this. The only thing that it would affect is some of our junior recharge. So we're hopeful that we'll come to some kind of resolution in this so that we can move on. But that's kind of the latest update with Nebraska. Thanks, Dan.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. So what you're saying is for a state to spend $500 million for non-irrigation season to grow alfalfa, it doesn't make a lot of sense, right?
I don't think my board would approve it. So that's all I'm saying.
Yeah. Great. Thanks, Jim. How about Metro?
Is there any, I mean, I think we've all been tracking it, and it's not just obviously a South Platte issue, it's a statewide issue. is there any more, I don't know if there's more to report on. I've been hearing from my Nebraska Nature Conservancy chapter, and they're hearing very different facts from their state than we've always heard from Kevin and the staff here. I don't know if that's on the agenda or anything more to talk about. I don't want to interrupt the roundtable reports, but I'd be curious to kind of hear the latest, because it does all seem like what Jim was saying, like a bit of a, you know, harebrained scheme, or you know, great if they want to spend money to explore it. I think he's right, but I've been trying to kind of figure out what's real and what's not, and whether the state needs to respond, or if Nebraska will spend a bunch of money, spin their wheels, and realize that it's not feasible.
Yeah, I don't want us to get like bogged down with that, Aaron. You know, we're talking about intrastate issues, you know, here. However, you know, the state is engaged. We're really waiting to see if Nebraska gives us more information, because we frankly know what's in the news. And so let's just leave it at that, but we're preparing to see, you know, what this really means. Yep. Let's go with Metro.
Hey, everybody. Sorry I'm not there in person. Lisa Darling, Metro Roundtable. I am actually in Orlando, Florida. It's 86 degrees.
Oh, Lisa.
And there's lots of water here, lots of water. So, so I apologies and thank you for indulging me from very, very, very far away. I had, Aaron, what you said just really did resonate with me, because it does seem like Nebraska is getting some bad advice, but I agree, Dan, we can shelf that for a little while. You know, I was just going to mention that one of the things that we were really concentrating on for the Metro Roundtable is implementing some of the goals and the measurable outcomes from the BIP. So we're not just sort of sitting and looking at the update as something that's just going to stay static and not be advancing. So each of our subcommittees are actually looking at those goals and measurable outcomes and trying to identify projects that could be done in 1 or 2 years that benefit the entire basin, not specific to supply for any particular entity, really focusing on conservation and efficiency projects. And so we're really excited, because I feel like we're coming up with more solutions and more drive to get the BIP taken care of and accomplished. And so we're really excited about that. But thank you.
Great. Thanks, Lisa. I appreciate that. We're all jealous where you're at, of course. Great. Colorado. Stan, you want to kick it off?
Thank you, Dan. First of all, as always, we're happy to have you aboard. You know, hopefully you'll have the same energy in 4 years that you've got today. Yeah, which is going to be debatable, especially if Nebraska and other people continue on with what they're planning on doing. Colorado River Basin, you know, we haven't really been more active than finishing off the BIP and the water plan, working on the fine points that we've had to worry about. Also commissioning a study to look closer at the lower Colorado River and the flooding and issues and how we can monitor and take care of that in the future. And I know I'm straying from in-basin stuff, but the two things that really happened besides having a few meetings is basically the Colorado River Water Use Association met in person in Las Vegas in December, and then the Colorado Water Congress met in Denver also in January. And I think what was coming out is finally people are being able to talk. You know, in those meetings, you talk about everything from in-basin to out-of-basin. And certainly with what's been happening over the last few years, we've got Nebraska, you know, kind of gang tackling and jumping on board with everybody else. But we've been debating all our issues with the Colorado River Compact and issues there. It was kind of interesting. Everybody's throwing around millions of dollars anymore, but I think it was $200 million the lower basin was going to basically put into putting another 500,000 acre feet in Lake Mead, if that in fact happens. And as you know from some of these meetings, whether it's the Interior or the Bureau of Reclamation, they always tend to have a big announcement. And that was the big announcement, besides what Becky Mitchell said, which was none of us had ever seen it. And which was kind of interesting, and I'm not sure we've seen it yet. But, there's just a lot of things that are happening all at the same time. And it's going to be difficult for you and your staff to keep everything going all at once. But these are all very important items. And, it's going to take a lot of attention. I think what we're seeing more in Colorado River Basin is people asking more of the bigger questions than what we've had. Demand management, we've worked on that for a long period of time, but now we've got other issues that are out there and how we're going to handle those in the future. So it's been a very good discussion thus far coming out of those meetings in Las Vegas as well as, in Denver. And I think it's opening up a whole bunch of things that we really need to talk about. So that's all I've got to say.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. Appreciate it. Anything else? Would anyone else like to add? I don't know if Carlisle's on as well. Yeah.
Yeah,
Anything
this
else
is
to add?
Carlisle. I think Stan covered the issues well. I would thank you for having a in-person meeting. I apologize I couldn't be there for it. I had board meetings in Jackson, Mississippi the last 2 days, so it made it impossible for me to get there for that meeting. But I really appreciate moving back toward in-person meetings. I think we get a whole lot more done in in-person meetings than we do the way we've been trying to do things. And the issues just keep getting bigger and bigger, and it makes it more important than ever that we get leadership together to discuss the important water issues on the Colorado River as well as the rest of the state. So thank you.
Great. Thanks, Carlisle. And I skipped over, Greg, did you want to add anything from Metro as well after Lisa spoke?
Do not have any other updates, Lisa.
Okay.
I think that the roundtable is doing a fabulous job tonight. The IB and Bob Peters and others have really stepped up to really look at how to implement those measurable goals. So hopefully it can be a model maybe for other roundtables, but making good progress.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Greg. Good to have you here, and we still miss you at CBCB, but it's kind of like, great. That's great. Okay, next, Arkansas. We have Terry or Jairus, anyone from Arkansas?
Once I figure out how to run this thing.
We can hear you just fine.
Well, welcome to all of you. Lisa, the wind chill in La Junta right now is minus 15 degrees Fahrenheit. So you'd need more than your bikini if you were down here.
Sorry about that, Jairus. On several levels.
We've been pretty active in the Ark Basin, as most of you, I think, have been involved in finalizing the latest version of the Basin Implementation Plan. I think we're past that now. We just hired a new executive director for the Watershed collaborative team, and we're excited about that. I think we got a top-notch candidate out of Utah, and we're looking forward to some big things happening with the collaborative. We completed a position paper on demand management. I think we forwarded that to Director Gibbs and also to probably Becky Mitchell. And I would encourage you to take a look at that document. Probably one of the most exciting things happening after 60 years of the FRIARC project authorization, Congress has allocated, as well as the state, money to begin the Arkansas Conduit, which will, if you're not familiar, will take high quality water from Pueblo Reservoir all the way down to the Kansas border. We have at least 17 municipalities in the lower Ark that are unable to meet water quality standards, radium, selenium, all kinds of really nasty stuff. And this will provide a freshwater, a quality water supply for those entities. And I think that's about it.
Great, thanks so much. I don't know if Terry is also on the line too. Terry, if there's anything you want to add? I don't see him. Yeah.
I don't see him.
Okay. Sounds good. Great. Thanks so much for that update. Next, we have Gunnison.
Good morning.
Morning.
I think our report's going to sound a lot like some of the others. We've been working hard to finish our BIP, and I think one of the things that came out of the BIP was a need to do some more better outreach, and we've been working with a couple of people that have some specialty in outreach and trying to improve what we're doing in terms of reaching out to the community. The roundtable is really pretty concerned about demand management, and I think we've sent one letter about it, and I think we're going to probably be working on a position paper similar to some of what the other roundtables have done. I think the other thing they're real concerned about is funding for upgrading aging infrastructure and whether there's going to be funds to be able to keep what water we already have functional. And so that's another thing we've been kind of bouncing around along with forest health.
Great. Thanks, Joanne. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
I don't see Mark Rober on there, so let's move to North Platte.
Good morning, everybody. Sorry I can't be there with you today. I'm really delighted we're going back to in-person meetings. There's so much that goes on, networking among individuals outside of the meeting. So thank you, Dan, for bringing us to this point. I'm delighted. My son's an ER doc, and he called me last night, and he was so excited. He works in Arizona. It's the first time since February 2020 that he's pulled a shift and not seen one COVID patient. So it was a big celebration. So I want to first start with your call for commitment, Dan. I personally will make that commitment and delighted to do so. I cannot speak for my roundtable. They have taken a path of minimal effort on a number of things, but I will carry the challenge back to them and see where we go from here. And Russ, you know well the frustration on the part of some of the members of the roundtable feeling they don't need a second job, quote unquote. So the roundtable in the past few years has focused all the attention and WSRF grant money on improving irrigation infrastructure, which makes sense relative to the landscape in our basin. We also are the only basin connected to the North Platte till it crosses into Wyoming. There was a review of all the infrastructure projects that had been done in the last few years in conjunction with NRCS. There's a PowerPoint there. Russ, I believe you have that if anybody's interested. From my personal perspective regarding our basin implementation plan update, I was disappointed that the majority of the roundtable chose a path of least resistance and least effort. So it's pretty much the 2015 document with limited changes in wording, including some removals of reference to environment and recreation. We do not currently have a liaison from CPW. If that's something we can get remedied, I'd really appreciate it, since we have so much public land, state land up here in this basin, and important CPW SWAs that could use some attention in terms of rehabilitation of riparian corridor. And we are also missing education and outreach coordinator. So with that, I yield my time. Thank you.
Thanks, Barbara, and thanks for your commitment. And we will get working, looking at Kelly, get a CPW person that can participate. And then also I'm committed to, if it's helpful for me to come up to Walden, sometime in the near future and, meet with your roundtable and kind of highlight the importance of participation, sign me up. I'll be there. I can't be there this week, but I could be there. Sure.
I think we'd give you a little more notice than that. And thank you so much for that generous offer. We'll see what we can do. Thank you.
Yeah. It looked like, was there a comment or a question from, was it Juris?
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that Barbara hadn't encountered all of those North Park wolves.
Actually, I've seen them. It's such a fraught discussion right now that's going on in the state. I will reserve my personal opinions. But these are wolves that moved in naturally. They were not reintroduced. They've been here for over a year, as Dan and his team well know. And the challenge is to finish those rules for reintroduction. Thanks.
Yeah, not to get sidetracked, but two weeks ago, I had one of the craziest 2-day events in my job as DNR director. So I went up to Jackson County to participate in the collaring of the first pup. There's a pack of 8, 6 pups, and one female pup was collared. So the first pup that was born in Colorado and collared in Colorado. Next morning, I get a call that says, hey, there's a court in California that changed the direction from the previous administration, and now wolves are listed again in the lower 48 states, and now hence managed by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. So kind of a swing of a day of events, to say the least. But if anyone's interested in photos, that's some great photos from that event.
That pup you collared was truly a black beauty, and I offer my time and effort if there's anything I can do to help you with these issues up here in Jackson County.
Yeah, no, thank you. Appreciate it. Okay, next up is Rio Grande. I believe I saw Keith on there. Nathan may be on there as well, but I definitely saw Keith. Can you all hear?
There's Keith. Go ahead, Keith.
I'm going to turn it over to you, Nathan.
Okay. So the Rio Grande, we've been doing a hybrid meetings here, trying to keep some semblance of the group effort. We are currently not struggling with active participants. We're pretty fortunate that way. We have a lot of people willing to do their part, and so I apologize to those of you that are struggling. It's not one that we're sharing right now, and I hope we don't get that way. Our biggest concern we've got right now is with the renewable water resources proposal to export water. This is an issue that raises its head about every 15 to 20 years here in the Valley. It kind of tends, if we're not careful, it tends to vilify one segment of the state against another. And that's not our position in the Rio Grande. We're not holding ill will towards the Front Range or Douglas County. It's just the bad actors at renewable water. So that's something that we're really putting a lot of effort behind, is kind of trying to correct the bad and just false information that they put out. Our Basin implementation plan went very well. I thought we got it updated well. It's reflective of what our goals are for the Rio Grande. We're optimistic about where that's headed. One of our biggest concerns is, like everyone else, we have compact issues with New Mexico. That's always seems like it's always in the Supreme Court and under negotiation again. And so we've got our struggles there, but overall, things are pretty good for us. We have so far we've got letters of opposition to the water export from everybody, all the senators, representatives, everybody that it matters. So we're feeling like we're in a pretty good position, just dealing with life as it comes. So nothing really to complain about, just here to work and keep moving forward.
Great, thanks, Nathan. Keith, anything you want to add?
No, I think Nathan pretty well covered everything. We have had good participation. Like Nathan said, even with having a hybrid meeting, we have some people come in person and others on Zoom. So we've had good participation with our meetings through all this without having face-to-face all the time. So I think that's been good in our basin.
Great. Thanks so much, Keith. Next up is Yampa White Green. I think I saw Tom on there maybe.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. Yeah, I'm here, and I think Jeff Myers is on as well, and so I'll let him kick in just a minute. In the Yampa White Green, we have stayed active, meeting mostly virtual, but some hybrid meetings, and then more recently in-person meetings. So I don't think there's a lack of commitment. We have a great turnout even to the virtual meetings. This last while, as everybody else, we've completed our BIP. We're in the middle of an integrated water management plan. We have a big river subcommittee that's been very active. Jeff will talk about that. Pepo, and then in our basin, we've also been recently declared over appropriated. So we're looking at augmentation plans and things that you guys have dealt with for years, but is brand new to us. In the integrated water management plan, we're in trying to honor our original goals and objectives statements that when we started down this road, and our decision-making criteria, which was to benefit all uses with all the recommendations that come out of that. And that takes a lot of time and a lot of back and forth, but we're making some great progress, I think. Dan, I think to your framing at the beginning, we're in a time where there's a general feeling throughout our basin that things are coming to a head. We're still in a drought. It's snowing there now, so maybe we're going to get better. By the way, I'm not in my county right now, and I think that's about all I have to report on. Just the idea that you're right. It's going to take commitment. I believe we all believe that we're in a time now where what we have done for years is, yes, we've got to deal with some things, but we have time is suddenly becoming more urgent, and it's going to demand that we have those adult conversations that we've been putting off.
Great, thank you, Tom. Let's see, Jeff, anything you want to add?
Yeah, thanks, Tom. Thanks, Dan. I am the co-chair along with Tom of the Big River Committee. We have a pretty active BRC in our basin, and our recent efforts have been focused on kind of two things: the forest health ecosystem management idea, which, to be frank, is such a big topic. I think we're struggling a little bit to see how we're going to tackle that within the roundtable itself. There are several BRC members who are interested and know a lot about it. You know, guys like Pat O'Toole and T. Wright. We just have had a hard time figuring out exactly what thread to pull on there. But the focus topic of the interim operating guidelines and the way that those are operating has been a good topic for the BRC. We're kind of moving forward on that. We had an excellent guest speaker at our last meeting. We've got a lot of notes, and there are many people in the roundtable, but especially in the Big River Committee, that feel like the interim guidelines are growing in importance every day. As we possibly approach curtailment, we know that there'll be multi-state litigation involved with that in all likelihood. So that makes the interim operating guidelines all the more critical for us. And so we're really trying to study that and understand the implications for our basin, and make sure that we communicate clearly in that context what our needs are. So that's probably the next thing you're going to see from the Yampa White Greens Big River Committee. If you're not monitoring the snowtail sites, this morning Yampa White's at about 87%. We did get some snow yesterday and overnight, about 3 inches up here. But Dan, to the extent that you can continue to put your order in, we would appreciate that.
I'll work on that, Jeff. Thanks. Okay, next up is Southwest, and I believe Al and Ken are online, I believe.
Yes, we are. Yeah, like everybody has mentioned, one of the main things we've been doing is updating our BIP, and we had a very dedicated group of a small number of people, but we had some good, I'll say hard discussions and brought out some issues that needed to be addressed. And I think we came to a good consensus and our final version. So that occupied a lot of our time. It was, I think they were all done but via Zoom. And I think to a certain extent, it was good because we saved a lot of time for the driving time that we would have all had to undertake if we were meeting at some central location. So that has been, I'll say, one of the main focuses. And then we have 3 stream management plans or integrated water management plans going on in the basin, one in the San Miguel, Dolores area, and then in Mancos, and then here in the upper San Juan. And I guess those have brought, they're in various stages. The San Miguel's, I think, in 5 or 6 years worth of effort. Mancos, a couple of years, and here in the upper San Juan, we're in our year 4, but our final phase of that, trying to see how we're going to be moving forward in what form, whether it's a incorporated or LLC or whatever. So we're working through those things. And then I guess the other big thing that Ken has, I'll say, spearheaded or been the chair of is our Colorado River Basin subcommittee that Ken convenes either in between roundtable meetings or just prior to roundtable meetings, so we can have some more detailed discussions of various issues going on within the basin, and particularly how they affect us. So those that can participate and we can get into those more detailed discussions that we have time for at the regular roundtable meetings. And then I guess, well, there's Ken and I and Melly's also here in our roundtable, and we added Steve Wolf, the general manager of the Southwest District, as our alternate. So it's good to have Steve in our basin, and it's really appreciated. I really appreciate him being here and what he's bringing to the roundtable. So I guess that's basically a short one. And Ken, I don't know if you have anything to add, or Melly.
Sure. I'll make a few observations. I think drought is still kind of ever present. And it's been there as you started this meeting, Dan, for the last 20 years. And so it's bringing a lot of focus from even the big Colorado River issues to our local issues, tough conversations like Tom was mentioning. So we'll see where that goes. The last 24 hours have been great. We've all been around water long enough to know one storm probably doesn't change things, but it's going to make people feel a lot better, and it may mitigate some of the problems we saw last year. So that's going to stay with us as a point of conversation. As a roundtable, we have a lot of new faces. As Al mentioned, Steve Wolf, myself I've just been on there a few years. So we're seeing some generational turnover on our roundtables. We have had mixed participation on these Zoom meetings, so going back in person will probably be on our list for the next meeting. And we had a pretty good turnout last summer when we had a in-person meeting and Zoom. So we'll see how that goes. I'm hopeful. Forest health issues remain huge here in the Southwest. I wouldn't say the roundtable's intimately involved in them. I think we have funded some monitoring through MSI related to some of the stream health. And that will probably grow that connection between water and forests. But those independent collaboratives all over the San Juan National Forests are doing great. And we're all affected and involved in them outside of the roundtable. So we might build some bridges there. And Dan, your department's been very helpful with all those discussions. And finally, we probably should be in Breckenridge now. everybody here is missing a powder day. And I really think we ought to readjust our priorities. But that's for another day.
Well, along those lines, I would appreciate Dan scheduling this so we could get this big snowstorm. So maybe we need to have another meeting in another month to help supplement the water supply.
We can work on that.
I'll see you in Breckenridge. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Ken. Thanks, Al. You know, we have a little bit more time, so I want to open up to any of the governor appointees as well for any updates you want to share. And I'm looking at Melly. I don't know if you want to tie in since we're just talking Southwest.
I think these folks did a really good job describing what's going on. I guess and putting a more finer point, we're actually looking into whether we want to weigh in on the demand management whole question. And I just think that just folks want to, it sounds that folks want to be more involved in the discussion of big river issues with the upcoming guidelines and be informed and hopefully have some input into what's going on. The other thing I was going to mention is that, you know, there's quite a bit of money that has come to the roundtables, and the whole way that we're awarding grants is changing. We're used to as roundtables to give $25,000 here, $30,000 there, and just kind of make a recommendation for the statewide funds. I think there's going to be some adjustment to start giving out larger amounts of money. And I think the roundtable hasn't really, we've been too busy with the BIP, but I think we need to start focusing. And I think that all roundtables should focus. And I applaud the South Platte for taking a more aggressive approach rather than just sitting back and waiting for projects to pop up. Just maybe do a little bit more of an outreach, because it's not just state money. There's a lot of federal money available, and it's not going to be around forever. We have a very short window of time that money can be used, and if we don't use it, someone else will. So that would be my hope for at least my roundtable, is that maybe we get a little more intentional about bringing in projects.
Great. Anyone else in the room, governor appointees, anything you want to add? And then we'll turn it over to the folks online. Anything? Yes. Okay, let's move it to anyone online, any of the governor appointees that want to add anything.
Hey, good morning, everyone. This is Pat Wells down here in Colorado Springs. The bad news is there were probably about 4 accidents between me and you all this morning as I was checking the CDOT website, so I elected to stay here. But the good news is I'm extremely happy that there's snow on the roads and chain laws in the mountains and that sort of thing. So glad to see the snow. I just kind of wanted to comment. I guess during my day job, I tend to work in about 3 basins on a routine basis. And I think what I'm seeing is kind of themes as a governor's appointee, people I'm talking to, and in my day job is that we're all kind of learning what happens when you stress test the system. And I think we're all going through that, but through that stress testing, I'm just really amazed and impressed with all of the innovation that we're seeing statewide, a lot of the conversations that are going on where there's a little more of a sense of urgency, where it's not just talk. Really wanted to kind of emphasize what Jairus commented on with a lot of these longstanding projects that have taken years to get off the ground, like the Arkansas Valley Conduit. There's finally money flowing to those type of projects, and those projects are getting implemented, which is exciting. Some really innovative water sharing agreements that are starting to pop up, where we're taking kind of the policy direction on ATMs and actually implementing those policy directives on the ground. And then the last observation just in my travels is there really does seem to be a lot of discussion around forest health and coordination on forest health, and just kind of a buzz about how do we tackle this and how do we really give give this due diligence and justice in the water community, knowing the impacts that it's had, you know, how this kind of affected us all statewide with these forest health issues. So thanks, and that's what I've got this morning.
Great. Yeah, thanks, Pat. We miss you here, but we understand the roads, especially in the Denver metro area, were not all that good at all. It was pretty challenging. So, but thank you. Anyone else, any of the other governor appointees, any updates you want to give for the group as a whole? And just feel free to, yeah, great. Paul.
Good morning, everybody. Just real quick to add, you know, I think on the BIP update, some of the challenges for all roundtables really was some of the virtual platform. And while Al's point is well taken, you know, a significant amount of drive time saved. Our chair in the Colorado Basin and I were talking, you know, as chairman, he had one meeting in person for the Colorado Basin Roundtable, and the remaining part of his 2-year position as our chairman has all been virtual. And so we're excited to get back to work. I think that the roundtable has remained very active, but it's going to be good to have FaceTime with everybody. And I also wanted specifically to thank Mr. Sands there for going above and beyond the call of duty to help process with BIPs and getting them posted. So thanks a lot, Russ.
Great. Thanks, Paul. Appreciate that. And the screen we have in front of us, we see Paul now, so I can't tell if anyone else is raising their hand, but feel free just to speak up if you're a governor appointee, if you have anything else you want to share with the whole group. Okay, going once.
Yeah, nobody's
No?
raising their hand.
Okay, great. Okay, no one's raised their hand. Okay, perfect. Well, good. Let's move on. And before we move on, how's everyone doing? Do we need to take a quick break? We have a break scheduled a little bit later, but are we in good shape? Yeah? Okay, great. Okay, next up, we have Lisa to give a Pepo update.
Thanks, Dan. I just wanted to tell everyone about, we had a Pepo meeting yesterday afternoon. Again, I just want to welcome Elizabeth as the CWC staff that's taking on this huge role of education along with Russ and Ben. We were also joined by Rob Sakata, a CWCB board member, which was great. As many of you already know, and as Melly just mentioned, the CWCB staff have been working really hard to stabilize the roundtable funding, and that includes Pepo. And I think all of the Pepo reps are really excited at the prospect of having up to $25,000 a year to apply to education and outreach, which is fabulous. So at yesterday's meeting, there were lots of discussions about developments of videos, website updates, and onboarding documents for Roundtable. I think many of you have already heard about that. There will be mini tours that will be associated with the Water 22 effort that's coming up. I think we're still working through some of the details about how those monies can be applied for and then processed. But CWCB staff have helped us by developing a checklist that could be used by the roundtable. So each one can actually be proactive at choosing how they want to process these funds and develop the projects utilizing those $25,000, up to $25,000 a year. One of the things that we are talking about is a BIP at a glance document, which would be great for public outreach, getting that translated, which would be a huge step forward as well. So we're starting a conversation about a larger messaging effort as well that would start in 2023 that would likely tie into Water 22. And I've mentioned that a couple of times. The Water 22 has gotten launched by the governor, by Dan. It's really exciting. If you need any information at all, there's a web page that's available, and I'd be happy to point you in the right direction because it's in full swing. And this messaging effort that we are talking about developing in 2023 would sort of take that momentum and drive it forward. So we're really super excited about the public education opportunities that we're having. So just stay tuned. And thank you again to staff who have just really, I think, gotten Pepo back on track. And Barbara, I'd love to talk to you about ways that we can get you some representation too. in the outreach and education. So that's all I have.
Great, thanks, Lisa. Any questions for Lisa? Okay,
And
great.
I should mention, I am working in Orlando. There's a conference. I am working. So anyway, not all fun and games.
I have a question for Lisa.
Sure.
So what would be kind of the first Water 2022 activity or thing we should be on the lookout for?
Well, that's a great question. And I will send you the webpage, which has a timeline, has an events calendar that can let you know they're developing a speakers bureau. There will be book clubs. And then each of the basins will also have a mini tour that's going to be developed in coordination with the Pepo liaisons that will hopefully get a lot of outreach to folks. And so I'll send you that information over, Ken, so you can check it out.
Thank you.
Great. Well, any other questions? Okay, seeing none. Thanks, Lisa. Thanks so much. Appreciate that. Okay, next up, we have a few updates on some key topics. We're going to start out with Colorado River updates from Amy Ostick. So come on down.
Stan, good to see you all in person. I think I have a couple slides, hopefully, but I'll keep this pretty quick. You guys go on to the next one. So again, I'm Amy Ostick with the Interstate Federal Water Information Section at CWCB. And I'm just going to give a few pretty quick Colorado River updates, starting with DCP implementation. You guys could actually flip to, sorry, I feel really high maintenance when I do this. So DCP implementation, as you all know, there are upper basin and lower basin elements. And I just wanted to let you all know kind of what's been going on there. So first, the upper basin drought contingency plan has 3 elements. And I feel like it's important to remind everyone these days that there are indeed 3 elements, including weather modification. And part of the reason I wanted to raise that and just remind everyone of that is that we are currently looking at ways to spend the $50 million in federal infrastructure funds specifically for upper basin DCP implementation. And that's one area that we think we could increase funding. So I just wanted to start out with that and point that out. But really, I think what has been getting the most airtime lately is, of course, the Drought Response Operations Agreement, which I know you're all probably familiar with and have heard quite a lot about in the news and on the ground. So just a reminder that the purpose of this agreement was really, as with the entire DCP, to protect critical elevations at Lake Powell. Well, the lower basin element is, of course, to protect elevations at Meade. But with respect to Powell, the idea of this agreement was to give some flexibility to send water down from the initial units when it was needed to protect elevations at Powell. So again, as you probably already know and have heard me talk about a few times, Reclamation has already released 161,000 acre feet from the initial units. Now that is down a little bit because the releases from Navajo that were originally planned didn't actually end up happening. But that does include 34,000 acre feet from Blue Mesa. And I think, as everyone is aware, that had some pretty significant impacts on the local economy. So we have been making sure that Reclamation is aware of the impacts of those releases. And, I think due in part to Becky really pushing, we have heard from Reclamation that there will be no more imminent need releases. So that's kind of where we're sitting right now. But that's only one part of the kind of the DROA landscape. So the other part is, of course, the regular planning process. So the imminent need releases were essentially done to protect Powell before a plan could actually be developed. So right now we're working on developing the actual plan for future releases. And it's important to note, I may have attended a a reclamation webinar recently and heard that the document right now is really just a framework. So you're not going to see information about specific hydrology or releases. And I think there's been a little bit of confusion around that. We don't actually plan what those releases will be until we have more information about hydrology. So that'll happen starting in March. And we should have a plan in place by April. So keep an eye out for that. You know, our kind of thought process at this point is, at least with respect to Colorado, we have very little left to give, if anything. So that's kind of been the message that we've been trying to make sure Reclamation hears. But suffice it to say, there's more to come on that. So that is the DROA. You know, the other thing I'll actually mention there is you may have also heard Reclamation is planning to leave 350,000 acre feet in Powell that they otherwise would have released between, I think it would have been January and March, and that will be retimed for later in the year. So that, again, the whole idea is to protect elevations at Powell. Next, the demand management storage agreement. Again, I know that you are all intimately familiar with demand management, the feasibility investigation. I just wanted to provide a quick update in terms of what the other states are doing and kind of what we're hearing from the other states. So as you all know, this is a situation where we really can't go it alone. All the other upper division states would have to make a feasibility finding, as with Colorado, to actually use that 500,000 acre foot pool. So we cannot go it alone. We can't, no other state can go it alone. If any one state says we can't do it, then we can't do it. Colorado, and you know, frankly, thanks to a lot of the work that you all in this room have done, I think is really far ahead of the other states. In our feasibility investigation, we, I think, hit the ground running and just made a lot of progress before the other states really were ready to make real progress, to be frank about it. So all of the work that's been done in Colorado is culminated in this decision-making roadmap being adopted in September by our board. Meanwhile, the other states are really kind of starting to pick up their investigations. I think that due to the hydrology, there's been a real deep recognition that we need to think long and hard about whether this tool makes sense at this time. So again, we expect, I said I was going to provide an update from the other states. Really, the update is that there will be more updates to come, because I think that they are really finally starting to think about this hard. So what that means for us in Colorado is that, you know, our board, I think, has recognized it might make sense to give the other states a chance to catch up. We're also watching what's happening with DROA, and just kind of seeing what it looks like to live through this very dry hydrology. So all of that will help inform our process. In the decision-making roadmap, the way that I think the board sees it is it's something that is there for them when they're ready, when the time is right to start on that process. It doesn't have a specific beginning or end date. It just kind of lays out the process that would be followed to actually make those determinations. Next slide, please. I guess, you know, the other thing.
Ask a question about that last slide, or do you want a question?
No, go ahead. Yeah.
You mentioned, sorry to interrupt, but you mentioned that, and I've heard this before, that there were economic impacts from the early release of Pico Mesa, which makes sense. Have you, and maybe you have, you quantified and like summarized that for us to be able to see what the impacts were, and how did you kind of make those determinations?
Yeah, you know, we have, I think, a few numbers that we could share, just in terms of how early the, you know, recreation season essentially ended and what that meant. I don't know them off the top of my head, but I do have some numbers that I could find and share.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah.
Thanks.
I got sort of a clumsy question, and I don't know if we're being streamed all over the world, so maybe
I really hope not.
Careful with your response. I heard you say, let the other states catch up, and I don't work outside of Colorado in water, and I've heard my entire career in Colorado water that Colorado's on the cutting edge and we know our stuff. I've been around long enough to surmise that it can't possibly be that we're that much smarter. So it seems like it might be structural.
No.
Are the other states just not designed, whether it's politically or for these types of processes, to be able to like make decisions and sit at the table and get things done? Is that the bottleneck?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there are a few, but in my opinion, I think that's the big thing, is that we already have kind of this human infrastructure in place. I think that helps us, you know, get input, make decisions, and develop large bodies of analysis and research that help our decision-making process. But also, I think we have the mechanisms in place to make those decisions and to do the outreach and coordination and all that. So, you know, the other thing is we have just a very active and engaged group of water users and stakeholders and others who, you know, are really interested and have a lot to, and really involved and engaged. I think in the other states, there's been a really big need for a base level of education that I think we didn't have as much of a need for in Colorado. So I think what you pointed out, that's really one of the main factors that has contributed to us getting ahead.
Upper basin education or hydrology education?
All of it. You know, what is the DCP? What is demand management? What's the concept? You know, I think that our people across the state in Colorado were pretty well aware of what the DCP was before it was even adopted. And in the other states, I think there was a need to help people understand what that was, just as a general concept, before even starting on demand management.
I stand corrected. Maybe we are just smarter.
We actually just have more water lawyers and more water experience than any other state.
That's
The only thing I would add is you know, at least seen Becky Mitchell testifying in front of Congress, but also Amy's presentation with respect to the Colorado River Compact to the engineers was very good. So we've got the ability of people to educate that they don't have in other places, perhaps.
I think it's, and you know, the focus on Pepo, Water 22, why can't I think of the organization behind Water 22?
Water education.
Water, WECO, they do a great job, and maybe that's something that I don't know, other states might not have that infrastructure as well to share it. I know that the general public still is not on this level, but I think we do a better job and are certainly trying to improve that. So maybe we're smarter, but also maybe we are starting to do a better job at telling the story, which we can still do a better job at.
Yeah, I think that's definitely true. And I mean, the other thing is the other states have had a few other things going on. In Wyoming, they just haven't had a lot of money. And they're stretched really thin. In Utah, there's this thing happening called the Lakefall Pipeline that, you know, maybe some people were thinking about and working on. So that's all just to say, I think the issues, the resources, the people in each state, you know, all those factors.
I think Becky has a comment to make.
Yeah, and I have to add to that a little bit. We have this information conduit between the Basin Roundtables, the IBCC, that I think has helped us be smarter. Thanks, Sean. But also our system is somewhat complex when you look at our system versus how what's happening in the other states. Plus, we're the headwaters. So we are just primed to be more focused on it. And then I think with the Basin Roundtables and the IBCC structure already in place, we have a bunch of water people that are constantly communicating, which I think is beneficial. While sometimes it may be difficult to manage, and we really want the grounds up process, and that takes time, I think it's prepared us for the situation that we're in right now.
Great, thanks, Becky. Anyone else on the line that have any comments or questions? And Amy, you may have more to cover too.
Just a little bit.
Yeah. Amy, let's have you complete that first. Yeah.
So the other thing I just wanted to quickly address is that, of course, Lower Basin has their own DCP as well. And as Stan was discussing, there's well, a few elements of that. One is the shortages that 2 Lower Basin states have been taking this year. for the first time, Arizona and Nevada. But the other part is this reconsultation project or requirement, which is what triggered the 500+ plan. So essentially what that means is when Lake Mead is projected to hit a certain elevation, the lower basin states are required to figure out what to do to protect that elevation. And what they have come up with so far is this 500+ plan, which we still really know very little about. And our objective has been to try to get more information on that. It's kind of just trickled in, but we really don't know a whole lot. So, you know, we're going to be curious about how much wet water is actually going to remain in Mead. And we don't know at this point, but what we do know is that the lower basin is not trying to sell this as any type of long-term fix. It's not designed to save Lake Mead forever and ever. It's really meant to be a short-term Band-Aid, and they acknowledge that themselves. So that is all I have on DCP implementation. And just really briefly, you know, as we all know, the post-2026 negotiations are coming up, and this agreement is what will replace the 2007 guidelines. So we've really been shifting our focus to thinking about what we need and what we want out of that process. And I guess the silver lining of living through this very dry hydrology and seeing how the DCPs are implemented is that we're learning a whole lot about what is important to us and what we can give up and what we cannot give up. So based on kind of what we have learned and discussions that Becky has had with a lot of people across the state, she's developed some goals that are kind of serving as our North Star as we go into that process. So I won't go over all of them, but you know, I think the take home is that we need a fair and sustainable solution that works for the entire basin. We need to address overuse in the lower basin. That's something that just hasn't been done through the DCPs or otherwise. And we need to improve operations of the entire system and do everything that we can to really protect the water users in the upper basin. So those are the goals that we're really focused on. The other thing I'll just note here is that you may have heard at CRUA, Becky announced Colorado adopting the sovereign to sovereign, or working on the sovereign to sovereign engagement framework with the tribes in Colorado. And that will kind of be to guide the process of working closely with the tribes on a sovereign to sovereign basis to make sure that they're not left out of the process, to make sure that we're, you know, tracking what they need and what they want through this process. So we're starting to work on that, but there will be more to come. And the other thing, finally, that I'll note is that we have an engaged CWCB page that's set up, and maybe someone could drop that in the chat, where we'll be providing updates on the post-2026 negotiations and making sure that everyone knows where Becky is out and about speaking and having kind of a place to provide input. So keep an eye on that. And I think that's all I have.
Great. Questions for Amy, either folks from online?
And Curtis has.
Okay, Ken, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Dan. Amy, you mentioned the 50 million that's coming out of the infrastructure law. We've heard about that, but do you have any more definition to it, when it might come out, how the UCRC might coordinate into that? Any background that we should be thinking about?
Yeah, definitely. So the federal infrastructure bill, as I said, includes 50 million for upper basin DCP implementation specifically. And we have had some discussions with other upper basin states about what we need and what we can spend that on. And I think that the consensus is measurement, verification, data, things like that, that would support demand management if a program were established, but would also support drought response operations agreement, you know, making sure that that water is actually making it to Powell, for example. That's something that would be helpful to know. So things like soil moisture and things like that. And also, as I mentioned, weather modification. So to answer your question more specifically, there is, I think, still a lot we don't know about how exactly that money will be distributed. I think that Reclamation kind of wanted to have a sense of what our priorities would be and how we might want to spend that money. And we're kind of beginning to have those conversations, and hopefully based on those discussions, we'll get more information about how it'll actually be dispersed.
And Ken, just in a couple more people, we also have Nate Pearson here that will talk kind of bigger picture, infrastructure and funding as well. So he may be able to answer some questions too.
Let's save all the harder questions for Nate.
Any other questions for Amy? Yeah, I do maybe, and it may be more for like Becky too, but you know, I know the whole Drought announcement really caught us by surprise, to say the least, and we were very disappointed, and we made very clear to our federal partners that we want more notice. We really felt like that was not appropriate in many ways. But have we heard any rumblings about a potential another release, you know, potentially coming, or I haven't heard anything personally, but.
Yeah, so I think it's important to draw the clear distinction between the imminent need releases, which were done specifically because there wasn't, in Reclamation's view, there wasn't time to develop an actual plan that would you know, specify exactly how future releases would be made. So what we've heard is that there will be no more imminent need or emergency releases, but that does not rule out releases pursuant to an actual plan that would be developed, which the Upper Basin states are working with Reclamation on. And that would come at some point I think that the goal is to have the plan finalized in April. So there is a potential that we'll hear more about more releases after that. But you know, the other thing I think that we're trying to be very mindful of is that has to have an analysis of futility, of how much water is actually going to make it to Powell, of recovery for water released. So it's there are a lot of elements that need to kind of go into the analysis of whether more water will be released and when.
Yeah. All right, great. Okay, anything else for Amy before we move on? Great. Thanks, Amy, I appreciate it. Okay, next up, I believe, Russ, you're gonna give a water plan update?
Yeah, just quick few slides. Go ahead to the next slide. Just teeing off a little bit of what Amy talked about, it strikes me that when we talk about these conversations, and we all know the Brad Udall quote that climate change is water change. I feel that every day, especially as we've been living through this drought. But when we talk about demand management, we're talking about this 500,000 acre feet that, you know, presumably is spread across the Upper Basin that we could decide to do as Colorado first, and then as the rest of the Upper Basin. Next click, please. But what I'm constantly reminded of, and these are the numbers just coming out of the technical update, is that we have a 750,000 acre foot gap every year when we look out to 2050. And this is, of course, in those scenarios. If you do another click, it's kind of a mock-up of the scenarios up top. One more click, Vivian. There you go. So these are our 5 scenarios. And of course, in that highest scenario, we have this gap. This is the municipal gap. So the gap for agriculture is significantly greater. Obviously, there are impacts to flows and streams as well. But the biggest thing that can save us, if you do one more quick or one more click, Vivian, thanks. The biggest thing that provides some hope and can be part of that solution is really water conservation. When we're looking at those 5 scenarios, and we look at that worst scenario, we're seeing in scenario D and E, the highest impacts of climate change, the highest impacts of population growth. And what's really factored in that's driving, among other things, but a dominant driver is the influx of additional water conservation savings. And so when I think about this, and I think about that piece that Brad tacks on in his speeches, which I'm really grateful for because it can seem very doom and gloom, is that there is hope. And what it requires is a lot of this courage and tough conversations I heard a lot about this morning, and interested to pick brains of folks like Ken Curtis, who've just lived through some very dry times where you've done a lot of the right things. You know, you look at Jackson Gulch Reservoir, you think, well, they got the infrastructure, they've got a drought resilience plan, and they still ended up in a 0 allocation. So what are the practical drought solutions that we can be bringing? What are the things that we need to focus on? What's going to get us there? What are the suite of things we need to be thinking about? Next slide. So obviously this has been a huge theme. I'm showing you numbers from the tech update that infused into the VIP updates. Again, huge thanks to everybody here and online and everyone listening that was a part of the BIP update effort. We modified some of those numbers, but the overall numbers didn't really change. I mean, we still have those significant gaps that we're looking at, and all of this information, including those solution sets that the roundtables are thinking of, are rolling up into the water plan. So we're on track to wrap up the water plan this year. We'll have a draft to put on the governor's desk, but unless the board has a special meeting, we're probably looking at January 23 approval of the plan, fingers crossed. But right now we're just very much in the weeds of trying to summarize all this good input and put it into a functional plan that we can release on June 30th. So excited to have that out by the next IBCC meeting. And then we'll have a 90-day public comment period that goes through September 30th. Next slide. As you know, we're kind of revamping the structure of the water plan. You probably remember in that 2015 version, I kind of refer to it as the Wheel of Fortune. It's got all the things on the bottom. And of course, those are all still important and are all the things that we need to be thinking about and absolutely will be included. But we've kind of broken out into a more simple structure of just really looking at cities, farms, streams, and people. Because those names in and of themselves aren't adequate enough. We've really called those vibrant communities, robust ag, thriving watersheds, and resilient planning. Thriving watersheds, really breaking out environment, recreation, watershed health, and forest health, which Chris Sturm is going to talk about a little bit more, and we've talked a lot about this morning. And resilient planning, carving out that space to have this conversation about climate adaptation, these practical drought solutions, making we've heard a lot about that I like that Amy said, human infrastructure that we have in place, and the good work that the roundtables and IBCC are doing to help and expand. And big thanks to Lisa as well for leading the IBCC effort on Pepo, and for all the great Pepo reps that are doing a lot of that work to push information out. Increasingly, I hope that includes a practical solution set of what we can be thinking about for farms and streams and people and cities. Smart government's a piece of that section. So that's our funding, or it could be lean permit process type stuff, the things that we can do to kind of get out of the way or better support local government. And then increasingly, and I love this quote, but it basically says that there's without equity, we can't have resilience. Just a fundamental understanding that inclusivity and diversity make us better and that we need to plan together. So again, all these pieces at the bottom, and of course, conservation is going to be a huge focus, as well as education, and all these pieces will be kind of spread out across these. We're calling them cross-cutting themes. Next slide. So again, right now we're just in this crunch time of taking what amounts to over 2,000 pages of input from the original water plan, the technical update, all the BIPs, the volume 1s and volumes 2, and then you've seen these one-pagers that are out that we put out at the beginning of last year that kind of give a direction of where we're thinking things are headed. And then we have probably a good almost 200 pages of notes from stakeholder input along the way, including the Water Equity Task Force. And that's all now funneling into the water plan. And of course, the hardest part of the plan to write is the last piece. So of those 200 pages, I imagine the last 50 are really where the rubber hits the road. A lot of it's context setting. A lot of it is kind of what's emerging is important. Some of these things just that we need to double down on. But the last 50 pages will really be the actions that we build. What are we going to do about these issues that we're seeing? And so we're kind of focusing on those. We got some really good input. You can go back and listen. I think some of you were there at the board workshop, but we are really aiming to get this whittled down and in your hands on June 30th and released to the public. So if there are any questions, happy to take those.
Great. Any questions for Russ in the room first? Online, any questions for us? Great. Thanks so much. Appreciate it. Okay, next up, we have Chris Sturm to talk about forest health and wildfire ready watersheds. And Chris is online.
Yes. Good morning, everyone. I'm in Grand Junction this morning, so I can be in person for an event here. So you have me virtual. I have just 5 slides for you this morning, so that they're a little busy. Apologies for that. But just wanted to briefly talk about CWCB's Wildfire Ready Watersheds effort that was born out of legislation from the 2021 session. And our mission for Wildfire Ready Watersheds is to assess the susceptibility of Colorado's water resources, communities, and critical infrastructure to post-wildfire impacts, and then to advance a framework for communities to plan and implement mitigation strategies to minimize these impacts. before the wildfire occurs. So hopefully that is coming through clear. If there's any questions, let me know. But just to summarize, what I'll say is we're looking at post-wildfire impacts, which often involves changes to hydrology. I'm not sure who's controlling the slides, but please move to the next. Thank you. So there's two parts to this. What the legislation required is that the CWCB look at the statewide susceptibility to post-wildfire impacts. We've all seen a lot of statewide maps that show areas that are likely to burn, what the severity may look like. We've seen critical water infrastructure as well, and we are building upon all of that. But once we start scratching our head on this, we're like, great, well, we could just show another map of statewide susceptibility that everybody says, yeah, we're a threat, or we have a lot of threats. And we're going to do that. We're going to satisfy that. But what we think that's going to do for us is help us shop the locals and encourage them to implement the second part of framework for local communities, which is to do planning on a more granular level, to look at the same types of data, but in a more detailed fashion, and run through different scenarios so we can see how post-wildfire impacts can affect us on a local level. So I'll start off with describing the statewide approach, and then we'll end with the framework. Next slide, please. So in our susceptibility analysis right now, we're looking at a couple of different things to define impacts. In order to have impacts, you have to have values. Oftentimes we call those values at risk, and you have to have hazards. So the first data layers that we're looking at are our values. And some things that we're analyzing right now are our water infrastructure. That's our built water infrastructure, reservoirs, diversions, ditches, our natural water infrastructure, habitat and conservation areas. And then outside of the water realm, we're also looking at life and property, structures, critical facilities, transportation infrastructure. And then we're still evaluating some other data for environment, agriculture, and recreation. Next slide, please. And so when we look at values at risk and hazards, then we get impacts. We get a better understanding of what the impacts are. So hazards that we look at are the big one post-fire is the hydrologic response. We oftentimes see big changes in hydrology where the watershed's no longer able to absorb water, so we see a lot more runoff. That leads to increased flood hazards, increased sediment through debris flows or hill slope erosion. We see fluvial hazards in the stream where we see patterns of erosion and deposition. All of these can have an impact on water quantity. Initially, there could be a lot more water, but then we can be left with stream channels that have incised into the valley bottom that can lower the groundwater aquifer and have local impacts on water supply, local very negative impacts on water supply. We can see reservoirs filling up with sediment that takes away from our storage capacity. So water quantity is a big issue that we're looking at. Other hazards that we're looking at are water quality. We see a lot of increased costs for municipal suppliers to treat this water or to bypass the water if it's not up to a standard that they could treat. Next slide, please. So once we finish the susceptibility analysis, we're going to have a statewide map. We're looking at HUC 12s for those of you that speak in the hydrologic unit code from the USGS. There's a lot of different subwatersheds in the state. And that will kind of give us an idea of where we should shop our framework. And the framework is a comprehensive guide for local watershed groups and agencies that can be followed to produce local level post-fire evaluations on a watershed scale to direct pre-fire and post-fire mitigation actions. So in my opinion, plans need to be have prioritized actions and they need to be implemented, and that's what we're going for here. So major elements of the framework will include guidance on what types of partners and stakeholders should be involved, permitting activities for both pre and post-fire actions, GIS preparedness is a huge piece of this. What data do I need to look at my susceptibility? Where do I find this data? How often is it updated? Who has it? Who are the contacts? Hazard evaluations, what needs to be performed? What engineering experts do I need in this realm? And best practices. A lot of this has to do with modeling for changes in hydrology and hydraulics, although we do have other tools that we'll be recommending as well. And then the susceptibility analysis, how do I determine the post-fire impacts to my community? And then what actions can I take? And this is going to be a big piece of the framework, because we believe that there are many actions that can be taken before a fire that will not only protect us from post-fire impacts, but will also improve our water supplies and enhance ecological function in our watersheds. So that was a bunch, but I didn't have a whole lot of time. My contact information is in the bottom left corner there, as well as some of the members of my team. And with that, Russ, Dan, I will open it up to questions or move to the next presentation. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Chris. Appreciate that. Questions for Chris? Yeah, Sean.
Chris, this is Sean Cronin. Can you hear me okay?
Sure can. How you doing, Sean?
Good, Chris. Thanks. And can I get a copy of these slides? And I coincidentally sent you an email yesterday, kind of jumping to the next step about the actions and wondering if you could speak to that. Is there any anticipation that there might be a separate or more enhanced funding stream to be able to get stuff on the ground and do the actions that are necessary pre and post wildfire?
Yeah, Sean, originally we thought the Colorado Watershed Restoration Program would be the grant program to support this. That program has been merged now with the Water Plan Grant Program for environment and recreation. So the intent is that those interested in implementing the framework can either do it under their own means or come to the CWCB for funding through the Water Plan Grant Program, environment and rec category again. And our match guidance has recently changed. So a planning grant, which this would fit under, can be up to 75% funded through that Water Plan Grant Program.
Okay, thank you.
And I'll just add maybe some of the strategy, big picture too, is, especially as a result of the 2020, wildfire season, and we know on the front end how much those cost and the impacts to communities, but in the back end in the water world, obviously, you know very well. But, a few things that the state has done too is, recognizing that fire season that we have to do things differently in the state of Colorado. So the governor sent a letter to Secretary Haaland and Secretary Vilsack that was signed by our 2 U.S. senators and then all the members of Congress for Colorado. So on the more progressive side, Congresswoman DeGette, and more conservative Congressman Lamborn, for example. So Republican, Democrat, and then signed by the Speaker and the Senate President. Requesting a Type 1 National Incident Management Team come to Colorado to do a thorough risk analysis to look through the lens of saving lives, property, and critical infrastructure. Fast forward, we had this bill, Senate Bill 258, that passed, that created a new program in the Department of Natural Resources called Cwcb. And so that's offered some flexibility to hire some key staffers that are working to implement this $17.5 million program that we can go into communities and just get work done. So instead of like in the past, for example, there's like the fur worm program that's administered through the State Forest Service, where there's a 50-50 match. Now we're really just looking at the needs and saying, okay, we're gonna get the work done, either contracting with private, timber industry, or bringing in the SWIFT crews, the state wildfire inmate fire teams, or conservation crews to do that work too. And then, we're using the shared stewardship model that we have that the governor also signed back in October 2019 as a framework to work on cross-boundary projects. And through, we didn't get exactly the Type 1 NEMO team, but we got what's called the Rapid Fuels Assessment Action Team. And so we're in the process of kind of developing, and I don't know if I dare say like a magic map, but a map that I'd love to see overlay with Chris's work. So we can see, you know, what are those landscapes that are critical for watersheds? What are those landscapes that we think there could be real fire behavior where, you know, neighborhoods are in jeopardy? And where those landscapes, believe it or not, where like we know that NEPA work has been done, or we know that like Boulder County or Moffett County or Summit County open space has done work, and have an understanding of where the gaps are. My shock with working in all this is that we don't have a map that shows the mosaic of state, private, tribal, you know, lands and what projects have been done and where the gaps are. And that's where I think we need a lot of focus, some attention on, and we are trying to do that now. But there's real money to the table, and Nate will talk a little bit more about some of that. But you know, just last year alone, we saw, you know, the furworm program go from $1 million to $8 million. This brand new program that creates a co-swap. The most recent announcement, you know, for the East Troublesome and Cameron Peak area of like, what was that, 79 million that, you know, Senator Bennett and Hickenlooper are working on. And then I was just out in Nashville last week talking about shared stewardship, and I was meeting with Brian Farabee, who used to be our regional forester here, and Chief Moore was also there, the head of the Forest Service. But within the next few weeks, they're hoping to roll out kind of how much dollar amount Colorado may see, similar to what we saw, I'm looking at Nate, with kind of like orphan well programs and so forth, where we had a decent understanding. But it's kind of once in a lifetime opportunity we're going to have.
Good.
Yeah. Aaron, and then Melly.
So a comment and a question. So this is really interesting, and I'd echo that. I'd love to be able to read the slide. So I assume that'll be distributed because I can't read all the lines there. One comment, Chris, you mentioned that if folks wanted to apply for grants to do this, that it would, maybe I misunderstood, it would come out of the environment and rec bucket, which from the environmental perspective, I have a little bit of heartburn on. Obviously, this is about more than protecting the environment. It's about protecting infrastructure, homes, reservoirs, all of that. So I'd be a little concerned if funding to protect infrastructure resources was to drain the environment and rec grant program. And, you know, there's obviously projects that are focused on protecting, you know, river health. That seems like it would be appropriate for the environment and rec grant program. If it's about protecting a reservoir, which a lot of this would be about reducing sedimentation, then it should come from the, you know, water supply and storage bucket. So I don't know if that was your intention, but I feel like that would be, you know, lumping all of this into watershed isn't really the way I've understood the intention of that grant program. And then I have a question, but it sounds like you're going to respond.
Oh, I will respond if there's a need to. This program is for watershed planning, not unlike the stream management plan program, and it's about watershed health improvements to protect water supply. And so often that is addressing environmental concerns in the watershed to protect water supplies. Those water supplies may be environmental uses, they may be municipal, they may be agricultural, but I think there's a precedent there in our watershed planning and an overall approach towards improving ecosystem function and structure to protect our water supplies. I didn't intend to make it sound as though the environment and rec category would be used for implementation of those actions identified in the plan. The actions identified in the plan will have to look at different funding sources, like different categories of water plan grants at the CWCB, as well as other funding sources from state, local, and federal funding programs.
Well, thanks for that. And then the question, and Dan, you kind of alluded to it, is, you know, there are these, I think we knew this with Mass 258 last year, there are these parallel programs at DNR, and then we continue to have the furworm program at the State Forest Service. And there's a number of bills that have been in the news recently. And we support this, continuing to expand the role that the furworm and parallel programs can provide funding for communities to address wildfire mitigation. Representative Cutter is running a bill right now that will expand the furworm to do more for post-fire needs, including removal of hazard trees and reseeding to address some of the soil issues. So I'm still trying to figure out how, and I know you all work together and talk together, but how can those be better coordinated? Because it's great that DNR has this code swap program and can go in and do things. Forest Service is really all about grants so far, but I don't know if that's still a work in progress, but figuring out how to better integrate both the priorities, which I assume will already be working with the State Forest Service under I know you have an agreement with them, but figuring out funding, planning, et cetera, how can DNR Forest Service really be totally integrated so we don't have not competing, but so we can make best use of limited resources on these projects.
Yeah.
I'll take that first. I'm sorry that the slides didn't come through that you couldn't see, but that's the intent of the framework here in the first item there, partners and stakeholders. Who are the federal, state, local, and NGO partners that I can work with? What funding mechanisms are available? So our intent here is to help locals identify how to coordinate. And of course, we're doing the same on our end in advance of a fire. Because what we've seen after fires when we're planning for post-fire impacts is that this process can be a little sloppy and disjointed.
Thanks.
And I'll just add, Aaron, that was a great question and comment. Like how do I start with this? We work really hard to coordinate with all the partners, and especially state. So we have, ongoing meetings with Division of Fire Prevention Control, State Forest Service, the DNR, Bureau of Land Management, U.S. Forest Service, of course. But when you look at the 2020 fire season, and you had legislators, knocking on my door and other doors saying, what more can we do? And I'm working with all the teams and trying to figure out what more can we do. And the State Forest Service was at the maximum, literally like legislators like, here's more money. What can you do with this? But they were maxed out. The Division of Fire Prevention Control, they were again, Firehawk, and they were adding capacity. What we did was added capacity in the DNR. So we were like, okay, well, we can get a lot of work done and do it this way as well. And I recognize that there's a lot of different grant programs out there. One of the problems I see is that legislators sometimes roll with ideas without working with all the different stakeholders, and they want to create new programs when you have existing programs that work just fine. And I used to work as Summit County's wildfire mitigation specialist when I was a legislator for my side job, because they paid $30,000 a year at the Capitol. But even my role in that, it was confusing to figure out, okay, what federal programs are there? What are their state programs, and what's CWCB doing? It is confusing, to say the least.
If it wasn't clear, I think this is great, and I was really happy to see DNR stepping in and taking that funding. So I wasn't at all being critical. I think this is really, really necessary, and it does sound like, now I can read the green bar there. Thanks, Chris. It does sound like that's part of the thought process. So I'm just, interested to see how it all fits together and works out. But again, really, really glad you all are doing this, and it's filling a gap that we definitely need to fill.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. And I will just add, Dan, before I sign off here, that the CWCB actually has a long history of funding post-wildfire impact planning efforts. So much so that we identified a need to develop this framework so that the locals don't have to go through the learning curve on how to best do that planning. So we thought by preparing this guidance, we could streamline that and hopefully make it a little bit cheaper and quicker to get to actual implementation of the mitigation projects. So thanks again, everyone.
If I could just add quickly in response to Aaron's question sort of directly, one of the other things that Senate Bill 258 directed was an organizational assessment to evaluate sort of the exact question you asked. How do our different programs all work together? How can they best work together?
Is that completed?
It's in the works.
Okay.
Yeah, it's in the works, and that's just big picture. As some of you know, we have a division of forestry within the Department of Natural Resources, but it's really managed through the State Forest Service. So, for example, should we explore, bringing them back into the DNR? should we look at what role Division of Fire Prevention Control have, which is the state, entity for fire? Should they, they're the lead on prescribed fire, but how do we work and collaborate all together? All the stuff that you mentioned, we're going to be kicking off. We've had some preliminary meetings already, but we're going to hire outside consultants to really help do a deep dive to look at all the different grant programs, who does what, and where best all these entities should live and function. So yeah, Sean and then Melly.
Go ahead, Melly.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Melly and then Sean.
Took some time.
And then we'll go online. Who has questions?
Yeah, thank you. And my question, and Chris, you mentioned this responding to a question from Aaron as well, but you talk about preventive actions and having to do with watershed improvements. Can you give us some examples of the things that you or the group is thinking about?
Yeah, sure thing, Nelly. I'll provide you some examples. I don't want everyone to think that this is the whole list. Okay, so just a few ideas. But one big thing that we see oftentimes in post-wildfire is that we have areas in the watershed in our drainage network that should be depositional areas, meaning that large amounts of sediment and debris should be depositing on the floodplain under restored circumstances or naturally functioning circumstances. Evaluations in the field have shown us that a lot of these areas have incised stream channels so that they are not well connected with their floodplain and may be holding up to a 5 or 10 year flow capacity in their channel, which is not a healthy stream morphology. So by identifying these areas in our drainage network before fires, we can decide upon or assess conditions to say, yes, of all the depositional areas in our watershed that are above our values at risk, always keep in mind that we're trying to protect values at risk. X% of them are functioning as they should, X% are not. So then that would lead us towards a prioritization of restoration to not only improve channel function, but to also help us in our post-wildfire impact mitigation strategy. One other piece that I'd like to mention, though, is that you cannot engineer or restore your way out of all the hazards associated with fires and post-fire impacts. And so another thing we'll be addressing is how to best set up an emergency response system so that and that's more of a life of property issue there, to get people out of harm's way as quickly as possible.
Okay, thanks. And when you talk about depositional areas, you're talking about reconnecting the stream with a larger, connectivity with tributaries and that wetlands, that kind of thing?
Well, there's a lot of different engineering and geomorphic approaches to connecting streams with floodplains, but that's kind of the philosophical approach that the Cwcb watershed program has been after since it was created in 2007. So we're just continuing to promote the responsible restoration of the streams. But it is going to be a site-specific design, Melly, so I'm not going to say we're going to do it one way or another. But in a naturally functioning system, our stream channels are well connected to our floodplains, so much so that on an annual recurrence interval, we see that the flows will connect hydrologically with the floodplain. So that's what we'd be looking at morphologically in the field. Do we have that? Or is there a need to restore the stream channel?
Okay, thanks.
Great, thanks, Chris. Any questions from folks that are online for Chris? Just speak up. Okay, see none. Yeah, appreciate it. Thanks for the presentation. Okay, next up we have Nate Pearson. Nate, come on down. Nate is our new DNR recovery director. Nate previously worked for OSPB and was our OSPB analyst within the governor's office. So he really has a great history and knowledge of, where every penny is in the DNR, to say the least. So Nate, I think you have a little PowerPoint.
Yeah, I've got a few slides. As Nate Pearson, recovery officer at the DNR executive director's office, really appreciate the opportunity to speak to you all today. I'm going to cover sort of a broad view of stimulus funding that's available for water. And we talk about stimulus funding sort of broadly defined as one-time funding, either state or federal, mostly in response to the sort of economic downturn caused by the COVID pandemic, but there's some other things included in there. And so these are sort of the broad categories I'll talk about here, mostly focusing on the middle two boxes. So state stimulus is, when we talk about state stimulus, we're talking about one-time general fund investments. At this point, the department is managing over $100 million in state general fund that was invested last year. Over 50 million of that is specifically for water programs, so 20 million at Cwcb through the Water Plant Grant Program and the Water Supply Reserve Fund, and another 34 million for watershed restoration grants, which is amazing. And as Dan mentioned, another 17.5 million for our new Colorado Strategic Wildfire Action Program. The second bucket, and from here on, they're all federal, but is the American Rescue Plan. And I'll talk in a little more detail about one of our proposals for ARPA dollars that is in front of the General Assembly right now. The Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act is sort of the big ticket item, and a lot more to talk about there. But a ton of money for water resources, drought resilience, forest health, and watershed resilience as well. And then Build Back Better is sort of more of the pie in the sky concept with significant uncertainty. Who knows whether that will pass or not, but it is unlikely to include sort of significant new funding for water, although there are a lot of climate provisions in there that will sort of more obliquely touch on water issues. And next slide.
Did you say unlikely?
Unlikely to include more funding for water infrastructure at least. So just briefly touching on the American Rescue Plan Act, otherwise known as ARPA, there's a lot of direct grants in the bill, none of which are really focused on natural resources issues. But then there's this big bucket of money called the State and Local Fiscal Recovery Fund being managed by the U.S. Treasury. Under that fund, Colorado was transferred $3.8 billion that the General Assembly has then gone about appropriating. Last year, they appropriated about half of that. They've got about half left to appropriate this year. DNR is pursuing $15 million in this sort of round of appropriations for groundwater sustainability and compact compliance in both the Rio Grande and Republican River basins. And we're really excited about that proposal and happy to talk more about that, but I don't want to sort of dive into the details at this point. So next slide, please.
So sorry, can you go back one?
Yeah.
Is the second sub bullet under the 15 million, that's related back to the Rio Grande?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, correct. And happy to share these slides. So just broad view of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. I'm sure everyone's seen the top line numbers in the news of 1.2 trillion. About less than half, so 550 billion of that is actually new spending. The other is sort of reauthorized spending. And you can see on the right here, sort of just putting the water investments in context. That orange bar is sort of water investments in water quality and water supply, with the blue or the sort of green bar, which is sort of hidden in the top right corner there. The smaller bar specifically for Western water storage, and those are the Bureau of Reclamation investments, about 8 billion. So out of the 550 billion, we're looking at sort of roughly 35 to 40 billion in water infrastructure, which is massive. And I'll talk a bit more about how Colorado stands to benefit from that. This money is flowing through some existing programs. New programs are being created. DNR is engaging with federal agencies and our federal delegation as these programs are being created to make sure we see new programs created in ways that sort of reflect our priorities. And then I'll talk about this a bit more, but a significant portion of these funds are likely to flow directly to local governments or water conservation districts, irrigation districts, or other entities, and as opposed to flowing to the state to then flow to those entities. And so, we're ready and excited to support all of these entities and sort of guide implementation across the state. Next slide, please. So I'm not going to go through this long list here, but this slide is meant to sort of be reflective of just how many different buckets of funding there are for water. I heard, I think it was the Commissioner of Reclamation say, we would be hard pressed to come up with a project that we could not fit into one of these new or existing buckets of funding that have been funded, it's a really exciting, also somewhat overwhelming prospect. And I really liked what Nelly said about this group helping sort of gin up projects and help support implementation and planning for those projects. That's sort of my dream scenario as we're talking about implementation here. So would love to continue that conversation with this group. And hope this is the first of many conversations. Next slide, please. This is just a broad overview of the state and federal agencies that are impacted by this funding. So, obviously DNR, but Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment, the Department of Agriculture, Department of Local Affairs are all expecting to have a hand in implementation of funding that is flowing through multiple federal agencies as well, including USDA, DOI, and DOD. So a lot of players here. We really hope that we can help be sort of that connective tissue that really helps all of these entities across the state navigate this landscape. Next slide, please. So I think I've generally been bucketing all of these different opportunities in sort of three broad categories. One is direct federal spending on federally owned assets, with an example being a $3.2 billion investment at Bureau of Reclamation for aging infrastructure. That money is specifically carved out for BOR to spend themselves on either their own reserved or transferred assets across their operating states. There's a lot of opportunity for Colorado projects to benefit from that funding, but it is specifically for BOR assets and will be managed specifically by BOR. And so to the extent you have BOR owned assets in your basins and have an interest in seeing a specific project get done, I think the way that program will work is that the sort of BOR regions will elevate projects to their leadership to then make decisions on funding, because their list of assets that need work is much longer than funding will allow for. So to the extent this group can think about how we influence BOR spending there, that would be wonderful. And we're certainly doing that as well. The sort of second category, in addition to direct federal spending, is formula grants to states, with the biggest example being the Clean and Drinking Water State Revolving Funds, which is not managed by DNR, but is managed by CDPHE, DOLA, and the Water and Power Authority, sort of in partnership. That is the biggest water investment. So each of those funds received about $12 billion to be spent over the next 5 years, which is just a massive infusion. And we've been having a lot of conversations with all of those agencies, and potential beneficiaries about how those funds will flow. I would say, although those are the biggest investments, they're not at DNR, and that gets us to the sort of third bucket, which I think has the most overlap with DNR specific programming, and that's competitive grants. These competitive grants in most cases are open to the state, local governments, tribes, other entities like districts to apply for. As you all know, sort of our general structure in Colorado is that those smaller entities do projects, the state helps manage and distribute funding for those projects. And so we're still really working and want to hear from you all on how we best manage that dynamic, because the capacity gap between available funding and sort of these smaller entities to draw down and implement projects with that funding, I think we view as one of the biggest obstacles here. Would love all of your thoughts on how we best navigate that. Next slide, please. So just next steps, as I said, we've already been engaging with stakeholders, our federal partners, the governor's office, legislators, and our other state agencies to try to build a structure that best leverages sort of our existing lines of communication, the IBCC being a great one, to sort of seize on this opportunity. We are, as a department, considering sort of the values, priorities, and even specific projects that we want to see get done with this funding. And we'd love to hear from all of you about the types of projects you want to see get done. Most of this funding is available for 5 years. In most cases, federal agencies are planning to spend it relatively evenly over those 5 years. And so in the first couple of years, we should really be targeting projects that are sort of shovel ready, but it does also give us time to sort of move the ball forward for other projects that maybe aren't as far along and fund them in sort of the latter years of these investments.
Could I ask a question?
This is the last slide, so please go ahead. And I'm done, so please.
Just trying to understand. So I have a couple of grants that I put in, Bureau of Reclamation, Water Smart, what is it called? Environmental Resources, just the new program. So where does DNR, do I ask you to write a letter to support my grant, or what? How is the interaction between the agency and the individual applicants?
Yeah, so I think we see it in a bunch of different ways, with that being one of the potential paths. You know, I think we'd be happy to evaluate that type of support. We're also having a lot of conversations about how we provide more direct technical support for helping, you know, maybe smaller, less prepared organizations sort of
Badly
seize on
needed.
these.
Takes a PhD to fill out one of those applications.
And that's a serious issue that I think we're really serious about helping solve statewide. And also trying to determine whether it's appropriate for the state itself to apply for, you know, a larger grant to then sort of sub-grant to smaller organizations to sort of bridge the gap between small organizations and the federal government. So I think there's a lot of potential ways that we can support and want to support. We're still trying to get a sense of what people around the state need from us and what is sort of allowable under the federal legislation and what we have the resources to provide. So it's a great question. It's something like
What's the timing? Because again, this is like you got to have it committed here pretty soon. And that's why we just are jumping into those grant applications. There's another one for the connectivity channel, the PL 566. So what's the timing until you have decided how you're going to help?
Yeah, so I think there's a number of ways we can already help. And I think the type of, you know, letter of support you're talking about is one. I think the thing we don't currently have the capacity for is to offer sort of direct technical assistance on grant writing. We do have a request in front of the Joint Budget Committee that sort of predates infrastructure that would add staff at CWCB to help build projects across the state for the water plant grant program. That could serve as a model. The governor also has $100 million in his budget to help serve as matching funds, not specifically for water projects, but sort of across the state to help state and local agencies meet the matching requirements of those federal.
Who does that?
So the governor has proposed that
Okay,
the legislature will need to pass that into law. But yeah, so there's a lot of things in the hopper, and I would say we'll have a lot more clarity in the next couple of months as session plays out.
And that would be match for agencies, not match for individual projects.
That is not a question that I think has been answered.
It is match, period.
Yes.
Nate, you also want to maybe mention the within the governor's budget too, the 6 FTE for.
Yeah, so those are the staff at CWCB for the water plant grant program that I mentioned. And so it'll be 6 staff, I think 4 of which will be spread across the state in basins, helping basins develop projects that, you know, are strong projects for the water plant grant program and meet the criteria and can be implemented quickly.
Who's the contact person, if, for example, for these grants that are out there? Like if I were to contact someone at DNR.
So myself, and I'm happy to circulate my contact information, but we certainly have a broad team. Kelly Romero-Heaney has been working closely with me on all of these issues as it relates to water. So we're happy to either answer your questions directly or put you in touch with the right folks across the agency or in other agencies as the question may dictate.
Thanks.
Whoever's steering the slides, can you go back to the first one? So is there something like that that's on a 1-pager or 2-pager that actually lends all the other slides that you said, this is the money and this is the agency in which envisions to distribute the money?
Yeah, so there are existing sort of fact sheets like that delineate all of the state programs. And we're actually, as we speak, working on updating that with all of the federal programs and state contacts and federal contacts and so we'll circulate that to the IBCC group.
And the state, the first part of the state programs you mentioned, water plant, for example, would be on there.
Correct. And DOLA's wastewater programs, CDPHEs.
That would be awesome. And this is all great. It's overwhelming to sort of round to the next billion. Not like Congress, but at any rate, I'm really starting to come to terms with how crazy expensive things are. Maybe I'm just late to the party, but Director Gibbs mentioned earlier about the Cwcb program. We got some numbers that it looks like maybe $1 million might be available to a county, for example, under the landscape scale fuels reduction portion of that. The numbers we're looking at, that's 300 acres. And so has similar sort of scale impact been done on the water side? I mean, I know we know the water plan number of whatever billion or we need for that gap portion, but we're talking more broadly about water infrastructure, aging infrastructure, all those kinds of things. Has that been done? And I'm almost afraid to ask, given the fire stuff, it's like we need 10x, 100x of what's being granted.
So I have a partial answer to your question. I don't think the analysis has been done of how many projects do we expect to be able to fund, or how many acre feet of storage could we create, or that sort of thing. We have, and we've worked with a consultant to identify the amount of funds that Colorado stands to receive as part of the infrastructure bill. And that estimate is between 800 million to 1.2 billion over these 5 years. That's excluding the sort of direct federal spending that I referenced. That's talking about formula grants and competitive grants. The low end of that range is essentially the formula grants we know we can expect, mostly the state revolving funds, and the delta being sort of our success in competitive grants. So for scale, maybe that's helpful, but to your point about, how many, stream miles of watershed restoration does that complete, or how many acre feet of storage does that create? That's, I think there's too many moving pieces to really do that analysis.
Questions online for Nate? Any questions? Okay.
Thanks again.
Room for Nate anymore? Yeah.
If you come up with other questions later, don't hesitate to reach out.
I appreciate it. Thanks so much. Okay, it is 11:45 or 10:45, 10:47. I know we're scheduled for a 10-minute break, but can we get by with a 5-minute break? Is that all right? Come back, a few minutes after 10:50, 10:52. So does that sound good? Okay, let's take a quick break. Okay, next on the agenda is actually me, and it's titled Trying to Path Forward, Foundation and Future of IBCC. I'd originally planned, a 2-hour speech, and given the time crunch, I'm gonna consolidate everything. But I also wanted to kind of share with you all, some of my thoughts, and especially since I was appointed last October, it's been a journey for me, frankly. I've really enjoyed, meeting with the roundtables, and look forward to seeing you all in person, of course, and getting around the state and really building collaboration and trust. So I'm really looking forward to that. But as some of you know, I'm a former legislator. So I served in the House and Senate, and I was elected in 2006. So I came in, right after HB 05-1177 passed. And there's a term that people use, it's called, legislative intent, kind of like, what do you really mean by this? When you look at, so it's easy to look at a bill and you're like, okay, this is what's state law, this is what's in statute. But sometimes legislative intent is really important. I worked on a bill, HB 1256. It was the Wildlife Habitat Stewardship Act. It really looked at how we raise the profile of wildlife as it relates to oil and gas activity around the state of Colorado. It actually made like national news and stuff. But, I had, it created kind of a rulemaking process where people could comment to see like, okay, how should this interaction between wildlife, the environment, and oil and gas exist? And I kept it very broad and on purpose to really allow that flexibility for people to kind of come to the table to figure out, hey, what's the right course for Colorado? So I bring this up because I did my own little research. I called up some of the folks that worked on HB 1177, including Russ George. Russ has been a great mentor of mine. He's absolutely wonderful. And I know he has great respect from everyone online and obviously everyone here as well. But I also wanted, and we all know Russ was really kind of the architect of 1177 and the roundtables and IBCC, but he was not the bill sponsor of it. To get something through, you need, House and Senate. And so, Jim Iskar, former senator, he was a Senate sponsor. As many of you know, he passed away a few years ago. He was absolutely wonderful to work with. So I do think of Jim, actually often, but obviously I wasn't able to talk to Jim, but I did call up Josh Penry. Josh grew up in Grand Junction. He now has his own business, and Josh has a pretty interesting background. He actually was, used to work for former Congressman Scott McGinnis, but when Scott was rose to a level of subcommittee chair of the Forest and Forest Health Subcommittee, Josh was a lead staffer. So he had, he didn't come to the state capitol just with, kind of state knowledge, but he also had federal knowledge. So I picked up the phone and gave him a ring to really, talk to him about, what do you mean by this? And what was like the real goal and so forth. And he said, Dan, the most important thing was really trying to figure out a state mechanism to have people come around the table and talk about, localized solutions to their basins. And, I think it's easy for us to, get into some of the weeds. And I know there's been some discussions, I think maybe the Arkansas Basin on kind of like, hey, I want to add maybe like a forest health seed or whatever it may be. And, within 1177, which I know you're familiar with, but spells out where the buckets are supposed to fit. According to Josh, it was kind of like, hey, if you're willing to have a seat around the table and talk about these challenging issues in your basin, that's wonderful. So I don't want us to get like too bogged down with some of this minutia. And really he thought too that the state needed to have a role in helping to work with basins and ideally to find, that common ground. So in preparation for this meeting, I know many of you probably, looked over the Water for the 21st Century bill. You looked over the bylaws and the charter. I'm not going to quiz you all or anything like that, obviously. But I just thought, me being a new person, really, I just thought it was important really to just do like a setback almost, just to make sure we know kind of why we're here and so forth. So I just want to highlight kind of how I see us potentially moving forward, but also share some of the successes that we've had, together as a team. And we also have some amazing facilitators too, where I'll turn it over to them to really talk about kind of like what's next, more or less. So does that sound good for everyone? Thumbs up? Okay, good. Okay, so through looking at everything, I think, the IBCC, first of all, is not a state agency, right? So instead, it provides a public forum for voluntary intrabasin, so within the state of Colorado, negotiations and issues that serve as a facilitator among the basin roundtables. This is voluntary collaborative process, must comply with the current system of allocation of water in Colorado, cannot interfere with intergovernmental agreements related to allocation of water use. The IBCC must also coordinate with existing planning and public participation processes related to the conservation of water in Colorado. It is also important to keep in mind that it does not include IBCC's participation or involvement in interstate compact negotiations. So, when Aaron mentioned like, hey, what about, this Nebraska stuff? Yeah, we can, mention it and stuff, but we're not calling up Governor Ricketts saying, please come to our IBCC meeting. We want to talk to you about this. That's not our role. We all know that, it's funny to joke about it, but we're not, that's not our role right now, right? With that said, there's amazing things that, IBCC can do, obviously, and has done. And it's amazing to think too, that it's been in place for 17 years, right? Like, it seems like yesterday that I was elected in 2006. So I was not involved at the Capitol for the discussion of this particular bill, but I was there right after when we talked about, you know, the funding of it to really make sure the basins have what they need to have some meaningful planning done. So let's move forward. I'm going to try to flip through some of these slides pretty quickly. And so you see here the mandate of the water for the 21st century. It was known as HB 05-1177. IBCC assembled and created the IBCC Charter in 2006 that laid out 10 foundational principles. I'm not going to read all the principles, but for example, one is all Colorado water users must share in solving Colorado's water resource problems. That's a pretty bold statement, but very, very important. You know, another one is during the process of planning to meet future water needs, water suppliers and utilities should give preference to development of economically viable water sources and demand management as they consider other options, including development of new water transfers. So, you know, it goes on of the 10 different principles. Let's go forward again. And then also some of you, you know, that have been here a little bit longer may remember too, you had the, you know, kind of 2006 to 2013, you had kind of the listing of the what's in and what's out, more or less, you know, no and low regret strategies. Let's go to the next one. Okay, and this is where I think like IBCC really did some heavy lifting to really create this, you know, conceptual framework that was done in 2015. And what that did was really, you know, provide this framework to provide social contract for, you know, TMDs from the West Slope, and its principles were adopted into the water plan. So I say heavy lifting because, as we know, TMDs is high octane topic that everyone, you know, around, you know, within IBCC agreed to this conceptual framework. So when we hear about potentially new TMDs around the state, I'm not going to name where they're at, but let's say hypothetically down the San Luis Valley, my first question is, how does that fit within the conceptual framework? Has anyone read the conceptual framework? You know, so for me, it's like a guiding principle that I believe in, that we all believe in, and that was truly amazing to see everyone come together on that. So let's go forward more, and then you know, of course, you know, moving forward too, we had the discussion on, you know, funding buckets, and then for the Love of Colorado group, many of us, you know, whether you're online or in the room, you know, participated in that role. That was pretty amazing too. You know, when you think of a lot of the different players, like for the Love of Colorado that came together, you know, like the Denver Chamber, Club 20, Pro 15, Action 22, local governments, water providers, Colorado cattlemen, you know, that was pretty sweet. You know, all coming together to work on that. Let's go forward. And then more recently too, you've all been involved too, the work group and input on equity. So that's been something more recently that you've been working on. And then let's go forward again. One more slide. Okay. And then, you know, with this, these are some other, you know, great accomplishments too of contributions that really came out of IBCC. You know, take a look at this list. It's really amazing. The one I'll highlight is Pepo. That's really super important, you know, when you look at, you know, what is the state, you know, what's the knowledge of water and how do we work together, and the outreach and education. I want to give a special thanks to Lisa for her leadership of, you know, taking the lead on that. But these are all, you know, really important topics as well. And then let's go forward. And then these are some key themes for success. So I think IBCC has a close relationship with the CWCB board. IBCC inputs have been supported by the board, and those outputs have been strengthened when the board incorporates them into policy. It's been, I think, a pretty good relationship. And then, you know, John Stolp has a great quote here too. IBCC serves as a critical role as a brain trust and think tank to discuss statewide water issues and provide recommendations to CWCB. Another key for success that I see, next slide, please, is this: IBCC has a close relationship with the roundtables. So helps elevate roundtable discussions and find common ground and thinking that can inform the CWCB board and other decision makers. And, you know, this is a great quote from Russ George: consensus can move mountains. Again, consensus can move mountains. And I've seen that, how we could work together on water. But, you know, when I was a former county commissioner, Russ, when he was the head of CDOT, he also worked to try to emulate more or less the IBCC process in creating what's called the I-70 Collaborative. And so communities all along the I-70 mountain corridor from Denver to Glenwood Springs, I mean, that's the mile kind of marker post, could not agree on what to do, what the future of I-70 should look like. So Russ came in and he was like, okay, Denver Chamber is going to have a seat at the table. The towns along that area are going to have a seat at the table. We're going to include Vail Resorts. We're going to include Freeport McMurray, which is the Climax mine. So you get the picture, you know, kind of environmental groups, government groups, all coming together, trying to find that sweet spot. He supported the process. He supported the fact that he was going to take the control that he had as the CDOT director at that time and give faith in everyone around the room that no, CDOT isn't the brain trust that has all the answers, but you all collectively are the ones that are going to lead in that process. You're going to have faith in that process. And I see collectively in the room, but you know, obviously, you know what I mean for the folks who are online. And I bring that up because I have every faith in you all too, that we work together, we find the sweet spot, and I believe in this process with all my heart. And that's why I'm committed to, you know, Barbara, I'm committed to hanging out in Walden with you and heading down to the Southwest and really working together, you know, on the ground, get meaningful projects off the ground that we can all work together and find that commonality, which I know is hard to find at times. So next, again, I had a 2-hour speech, you know, but we're trying to move this forward more. Next, I really want to turn it over to our facilitators to kind of talk about this next stage that we're at right now and to have some discussion. So I'm going to turn it over to Emily and Jonathan. And why don't you both introduce yourselves too, so everyone knows you're not just like folks we saw off the road or something like that, and you're here for the coffee, you know?
Yeah, and for the warm. I'm Jonathan Barch. I'm with CDR Associates. I'm glad to be here this morning. Emily.
I'll say hi as well. I'm Emily Smack with CDR Associates. It's nice to be here. Nice to see you all in person.
Great. And so one of the things that I think we wanted to do is really take that perspective of going forward, what is most meaningful for the IBCC to do, you as a group? What are within some of the opportunity areas that we have? What are some specific things to work on? And so my belief is that groups like yours, taking the time to really think about the future, your role, what's working, what's not working, but where you want to focus is really important. There are a couple things that just observing this morning that shine a light on some of the strength of the IBCC. One is the information sharing, right? The ability to share information across the board, that storytelling someone talked about, human infrastructure, the capacity to be able to do the kind of things that Russ George and others talk about in terms of collaboration and finding those opportunities to be catalysts and to be leaders in this area within your purview. And so, you know, there are two kind of questions that we have, that Emily and I have, which is going forward, where do you think that the IBCC can make the most impact? And secondly, within the opportunity areas, and we'll see the slide here in just a second, what would the IBCC ideally be doing, albeit within your charge? How do we get specific about that? It could be from Tyler's presentation this morning about connecting addressing the gap with community in terms of the funding pieces and addressing that, or it could be with the wildfire ready watersheds and helping with implementation. It could be a variety of other things, including the public education and those types of things. And so in 2020, there's the roundtable and IBCC survey. You see, and the questions were, what do you want to learn more about? what do you want the IBCC to discuss next? That's in the orange, and you see things around drought and climate change, big river issues, demand management, equity, forest watershed health, regional planning, and funding. I think that from 2020 to 2022, where we are now, the funding situation is a little different. The challenges are in some ways much different. And I think there's a next slide then. So that within the immediate IBCC opportunities, it's funny the bottom changed, but not the top. There we go. I guess I'm focusing on the green areas: drought, climate change, forest watershed health, regional planning, funding, roundtable direction, communication, ATMs, Colorado Water Plan. Those have highlighted in green, and I just highlight those not for us to limit ourselves necessarily with those, but to respond to those and build off of them. Because I think to the degree that you all can be as specific as possible about where you want to focus, what you think will make the most impact, how you can make that is really the discussion for today. And I think, Director Gibbs, we just want to get started with that conversation and then see sort of where that goes. So does that seem right to folks? Does that seem like a useful conversation about your role, and to the degree that we can be as specific about where you think the IBCC can help to move the needle on water issues across the state, serving as that statewide perspective with connections, obviously, to the board and to the roundtables and within your charge. That's really the discussion that we wanted to have in the next hour or so. Would we go to like 5 o'clock then, Director?
Yeah. Well, and as Jonathan mentioned too, I don't think we have an expectation that we're gonna, just with limited time, okay, we're all gonna zero in on this topic like right now, but as quickly as possible, frankly. It'd be wonderful if we could, have, 1 or 2 key themes that we think we can all get behind, that we think could be very meaningful for Colorado. And not saying the other topics are not important or anything, but it's just kind of like collectively as a group, like where can we find that commonality? And I want to stress too, I know like for my first meeting, there were, kind of votes taken and so forth too. When I was, I used to be chair of this I-70 collaborative, and that's how, I mentioned like kind of the brain trust of Russ George having that. We never had formal votes, we were just kind of like, hey, is the agenda look okay? Yeah, okay, yeah, looks fine, and we tried to find that common ground. And I know historically IBCC has tried to find that common ground, and I really want to charge us not to worry about, hey, I'm gonna make a motion for this, and you're gonna, half the room says this, half the room says that, but really where we can find that sweet spot and find that commonality. That's what I'd really prefer, and find that. Am I making sense to anyone? I know I'm kind of, yeah.
And I'll just build off of that, where and when you can find those commonalities, a common purpose, if you will, there's action and things that can be accomplished in far greater degrees associated with that. And so the idea about impact, first question around, so where can the IBCC make the most impact? And within these opportunity areas that we just had on those slides, what would you ideally do? What are some specific things that are obviously within your charge? So Aaron, I see your hand up, and I'd love to hear it when we go through this from all of the IBCC members. And so if you don't raise your hand, I'll call on you. So Aaron, please.
One question. It sounded like for our next IBCC meeting, it was going to be, whether intentional or not, we were going to get a look at the draft water plan update
in June.
So I'm curious if there is a role that Russ or DNR, CWCB staff think that we could play in. I guess I know there'll be a draft. So are you looking for input, comments? Has that already happened at the basin level? So one question, is there something there? I know that the IBCC, one of the primary IBCC contributions to the 2015 water plan was the conceptual framework. So thinking about that, especially in light of at least one project that Dan alluded to, may not be consistent with that conceptual framework. So that's one thought. I don't know what the draft is going to look like, but is there a role that would come out of that for the IBCC? And the other idea that is not, it's maybe less than half baked, but thinking about drought planning and response. I know that the CWCB is also thinking about drought planning, not just, Amy talked earlier about there's demand management, there's all these different things. There's also just drought planning statewide, thinking about kind of lessons learned, applications across basins, and potentially data gaps in various basins, which you can only manage what you know and understand. So that might be too granular, but that was the other topic that, thank you, Jackie, the drought resiliency toolbox. Yes, that is what I'm talking about. And if there's a role for us to engage on that.
Right. So two kind of things. One is about what's the IBCC's role in the draft water plan in terms of comment, and is there a role, and that's in the near term. A little bit longer term is about the drought toolbox and are there lessons learned, are there data gaps, and what's the IBCC, is that your sense that the IBCC could play a role in that? Is that, Aaron?
I don't know. I just was looking at the bar chart, and it seemed like something that, drought resiliency and planning is that there are going to be some common themes, and there's going to be different needs and opportunities in different basins. I mean, if you're a water user in, a high mountain pasture versus you're a Eastern Plains corn farmer, I imagine that the way that you are dealing with managing the drought are going to be different.
Okay.
I don't know. So that was the ideas that I jotted down.
Great. Thank you. Who's next? Ken and Ken, go ahead. Ken Curtis, and then Jairus, you're next.
Yeah, I guess I had two questions. One, I missed the nuance between the green and the orange coordinated topics. And can you clarify that, Eric? Or who was speaking?
Sure. Yeah, we can go back to that.
Go back to that.
I think the green was the more immediate opportunities, and the orange was
coordinated, or maybe more coordination with CWCB board or board outputs, or some kind of higher level coordination.
Okay, thank you. I guess the one item I hadn't seen in there, I think this morning you introduced, was Kevin in the room? And if so, is there coordination on some of the activities, particularly the West Slope measurement rules that are going on that relate to several of these items directly?
So Kevin is here in the room, but the question, Ken, is there a role for the IBCC to play in sort of West Slope measurements on these? Is that the question? Maybe I'm not understanding it.
Well, Kevin obviously has a formal process through the state engineer's office and other requirements, but those West Slope measurement rules, if I understand them, would play into some of these other topics, and I just wondered if Kevin had any thoughts on that.
And really quick, before Kevin may comment, we had 2020 data, and then we also had 2021. I'm not sure if we showed 2021 or not. But this information came from all of you, kind of what are the top priorities? What do you think we should work on, and so forth? And so it came from you. So I'm curious too, if, how many of these may change too, depending on the landscape that we have now, but maybe worth, maybe focusing on this one because it's more recent. Yeah. Maybe that's easier to start from. I don't know, maybe not.
Yeah.
The other one had a lot more other topics, but.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I bring up West Slope measurement because was not really as big a topic when we put in these votes, but I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Okay. Ken, did you have thoughts about where the IBCC could make an impact going forward where the specifics are given, given interest in the West Slope measurement rule. But in addition to that, broader speaking, whether it's drought and climate change, forest health, Emily and I thought, well, maybe we should do another quick poll with this group, but thought that might not be the best use of your time on that. So, but Ken, your thoughts on your role, the accomplishments that you've had to date, where sort of the future orientation of where the IBCC can best support and help the state?
I think they're all good topics. I do think ultimately we're going to have to focus on fewer, and I guess immediately I'd probably be leaning on the first two to the left: drought and climate change and forest health.
Mm-hmm. Can I ask a point of clarification on this 2021 survey? Russ, wasn't this the one that you showed us during the October meeting where you basically swept out the issues that you thought were the sole purview of the CWCB board? So it took out the demand management related activities that aren't reflected in this?
Yeah, I'm glad you're bringing that up, and I'm sure Melanie wanted to say the same thing. So when we took this vote, I think the question that specifically went to the IBCC was, outside of those other issues, what would you want to focus on?
So this isn't really reflective of what the IBCC said in that, because it was outside of issues that were the coordinated issues, if you will, that are showing up in the I just want to be clear that this is not reflective of the entire purview of what the IBCC looked at and talked about as priorities. So I think
it's not. You think 2020 is maybe more inclusive?
Yeah, I think it's more inclusive.
Yeah, so we can go back to 2020.
Yeah.
And the other thing I wanted to just,
if we could move that, it's fine.
Yeah. If I remember correctly, the question was posed what we wanted to hear about. And I'm not sure if there was a breakout and a distinction between things that we wanted to hear about and things that we wanted to work on.
More like updates hear about?
Yeah, I mean, we got a lot of updates and the question was what you want to hear about. Right. And that's very different. What we want to hear about and what we want to work on can be completely different things. Like, for example, forest health. We want to hear about it, but what can we do about it? Maybe there are things that I think that my point is that the survey, I think, was not 100% focused on what you want to work on, if I remember that correctly.
I think if you go back one click again, I think these are, well, I guess you have to go through all those animations. One more. Those are the two questions.
What do you want to discuss next, I think, is and learn about and discuss next. And I think for the purposes of this conversation, it's about what do you want to work on? What are the things that, and so, this was meant to not get into the survey and the questions as much as to say, let's stimulate the discussion about what is meaningful for you to work on. I think I listened to I wasn't at the October 2021 meeting, but I listened to it and it was about, well, we want to do more than just hear presentations, right? You want to work on it. I think you might have said that, Melly. And so I guess that's the question that we want to get, what's the alignment of what the IBCC wants to do. And so this was meant to be a prompt, and I would advise that we, thank you, sort of focus on that piece. And I guess, can I ask you then, your thoughts about what you want to work on? And there's a bunch of hands raised in here as well. I'll get to you in a minute.
Usually what I want to work on tends to be like the most thorny and controversial things. And the reality is that my perception, I don't know, I haven't reviewed all the legislative history, but I think this group has been most useful when you have topics that different basins may disagree on. And this is an area where we can, have a safe space to have those conversations without, hopefully being at each other's throats. And so personally, I think big river issues are up on top of the priority list. The guidelines negotiations are coming up, and I know that Becky is the lead on that, and the CWCB is behind that, but I think that there may be a role for trying to reach basin consensus on that topic.
What would the IBCC do in that? What would you all do to reach recognizing the parameters of those discussions, those negotiations, how would the IBCC help on those big river issues as those negotiations and recognizing the jurisdictional pieces? What would you do?
Well, again, they're very thorny, and recognizing that Becky has the lead on that, maybe provide a consensus statement of support would be helpful. I don't know, just getting the most controversial stuff out there. I just do think, and I think the man management, that's been on hold. We don't know if that's the direction we're going, but that's, when we figure out what Colorado is going to do, that's, I think, something to save water. That's something else I think we need to be involved in. Those would be my two top.
Yeah, follow up on something I paraphrased before, the idea 1177, I don't have a different history than you do. I just was around at the same time. The idea was establishing an entity that had an overarching ability to negotiate and discuss among themselves. There are certain limitations on what we can do and not do. I think what's changed throughout the years now is, the people in our roundtables are much more concerned about a couple of issues that really we don't have control over, which is totally true. But at the same time, our people want to know what the heck's happening. We got a great list of 6 goals, that Becky has come up with, and nobody disagrees with any of those, I don't think. Problem is, we got to go from goals to how we get to those are accomplished. And none of us honestly have had that kind of discussion or presentation. I think Amy's done some good work, as Becky, in the discussions about, what we're trying to accomplish, not, trying to get there. What we can do is kind of a reverse. It's not what we can do, it's what we can do for the people that represent us, whether it's CWCB or otherwise. Because we have a great, out of the 9 roundtables, we have a much better, handle on the thought of everybody that's out there right now than perhaps anything else. And like I say, the issues that we're keep repeating, at least, maybe Andy, maybe Millie, maybe myself and some other people, Dolores, has been the big river issues. And what's happened is that's all come to the forefront now. And I don't think there's a total knowledge among roundtables or the IBCC directing to the roundtables of what's really happening and what's going to happen, from here on out. As I said before, I've seen a little bit different Bureau of Reclamation numbers, about where the drought is or what comparison they're going to do, then there should be, I guess.
So to me, if I'm hearing this right, Stan, it's that it's being that conduit of information around these big issues for the basins and bringing that knowledge and that too. I mean, that's part of it, but it's sort of more deliberate, particularly on the issues of drought and management and other kinds of things, and building that and sort of education, sort of making. Am I getting that right in terms?
I think I think that's a good statement. Our problem is that, there's a lot of information out there, and I'm not sure it's the same information that everybody's getting.
Yeah. Andy, and then there's a bunch of hands. I see you on the screen. We'll get you in just a minute.
Yeah, thank you. I guess I mean, Stan, I think it's important to get the information you're talking about and have an accurate conduit for everybody in the state. The interstate stuff is not really the purview, the way I see it, and I realize it's open to discussion, but when you read through the organic legislation for the IBCC and you read through the charter, interstate issues are not really the purview of the IBCC as I see it. And it's important that they definitely inform the intrastate issues that I think this body was created to deal with, whether it's on the South Platte and the absurd arguments that the state of Nebraska is pushing right now, or whether it's on supporting Becky and her team on what they're doing on the Colorado interim guideline negotiations is really important. But I think when you look at it, what is it that is going to impact our water users the most in an intrastate perspective? Of those items, it's probably climate change, which is frankly driving demand management, right? So those things have the ability to impact how we all relate to one another and how we share this dwindling resource that is the Colorado River among our other rivers, right? So how do we make sure we address that issue, those issues that I think this is why we were created. And I think it's important for us all to talk about, because we have these shared resources that we care so much about. We can see what's happening to them in terms of the impact of climate change. How do we help as water professionals? How do we help chart a future that allows our state for the foreseeable future to live significantly less water than we thought we had, and still manage to thrive, right? That's what I think, and that encompasses a number of those issues that were on the poll. But to me, that's a focus that will require cooperation from all of our basins and all of our water user sectors and all of our levels of bizarre number of levels of government, right? And our actual people on the ground using water. So that's my thought. I mean, I just think that if we look at it through a slightly different lens, focusing on intrastate issues, it might help.
So I don't disagree with anything you said, Andy, except for the fact that, some people have sorted through and come up with a great idea that, if we're not dealing with 15 million acre feet or 16 or 17, we're dealing with 12.
Maybe 11, 10.
8.5 probably to get it all. But, we get down to that level, it's all critical. We're going to be at each other's throat. It's demand management and everything else much greater. But if we understand maybe where negotiations are going, we're not participating. I mean, I've had my, lunch served to me before at some of these meetings.
Good.
We can't do that, but we can at least be aware of where that's going, because sooner or later, we're sitting there and we got to be honest and say, we only got 12 million. They're taking, 7.5 through 8.25. They're not going to give us anything. The demand management is going to, basically destroy this state theoretically. So, to some extent, the more the people that we're quote unquote passing this information on to has an idea of what the hell is happening, it's going to be better than popping it up at the last minute and say, by the way, we're signing off on 12 million and you've got that. That's what I'm trying to say. And it's certainly the CWCB's, as put in the legislation, is, solely responsible for what we're talking about at that level. That's why I say it's more of an informational thing, because the pass-through, as well as providing input back from the roundtable, because you've probably heard it as I have. People are, real leery. What the hell is happening and who's doing it? And how good is our negotiating team? And who's really involved in this whole thing?
So there's an understanding, accurate information, proactive communication, and also getting back input to those who are responsible for, in particular, the interstate issues about input from the basin, from the roundtables themselves. Andy, your sort of notion about focusing on intrastate issues and how do you chart a path forward given climate change, living with less water, and for the rest of us, I'm interested to know, just to take that a little bit more. So what would you be doing if that was what you were doing, was help in that situation? And I'm going to call on Jairus and Nathan, you're next. Jairus, please.
Thank you. I'd like to back out of the weeds a wee bit and focus on John Stoltz said that the IBCC is a brain trust, but we have 9 basins that are brain trusts also. And I know that there are things that the Rio Grande is doing or North Platte is doing that would
Sorry, Jairus, I think you cut out.
The IBCC focus on interbasin. In other words, let's see how we can get our basin roundtables interchanging, working together, exchanging ideas. I agree with Andy to some extent that. Yeah.
See, it went out as soon as he said
There, Jairus, you've cut out there.
We can fuss about what the Upper Basin Compact Commission is going to do, but that's really not in our purview, and it's out of our hands, and we have no staff to develop any alternatives to what CWCB develops. So I'd like to focus in-state and start developing some ideas that can benefit all of our roundtables. And I know there's hidden gems out there that we just need to start discovering.
So the IBCC would focus on the interbasin, working together, best practices, exchanging, synergies associated with that. That would be where you would see the focus.
Yeah, I think there's some real opportunity there.
Okay, great. Thank you. Nathan.
I just kind of reiterate what Jairus is saying, but let me premise my comments. If we can't do meaningful work, we won't get the commitment that Director Gibbs is asking for. The work we do has to mean something. It has to have an impact. And whether it's interstate or interstate, it has to be valuable. And so I hear what Jairus is saying. Let me back up just a second. 50 years ago, Compact administration came to the Rio Grande Basin, and we were so busy infighting and worrying who was our negotiating team that we left all of the decisions to the Division of Water Resources. They did nothing wrong, but the way we implement the compact now, it's very difficult on agriculture. It doesn't necessarily reflect the season of use because we were too busy to get involved when we should have. Now we have the IBCC, we have this cross-pollination potential between basins that are dealing with issues where maybe there's some impact that could help on the Colorado. Conversely, we're dealing with storage issues and we don't know what to do. We have so much federal ground, we can't build new reservoirs. So we're going to the Front Range and we're looking at gravel pit reservoirs and we're trying to learn from that side. And so I think Jairus hits it on the head. If we can do some meaningful inter-basin communication and cross-pollination of ideas and concepts, we will be able to do what we can about drought. We can do what we can about interstate compacts and all the rest of it. But if we don't meaningfully put together the communication, this is it's just gonna kind of just maintain its swirling effect, and the IBCC never grabs its traction and accomplishes what it could. That's all I got. Thanks.
Great. Thanks, Nathan. Jeff, were you trying to get in there?
Yeah, thank you. It seems as though the interim guidelines topic has sort of been harrowed. So maybe we need to irrigate a little, but we've got the meadow drug, I think, here between Andy's comments and Jairus. I personally feel that implementation of that and the implications of that influence so many things that it's very important for us to understand what those implications are, what the shortcomings are, and to the extent that we can support Director Mitchell with ideas, and then I think that would be good. But I don't like to disagree with esteemed colleagues like Andy. And in fact, Jairus, I wonder, are you like in a witness protection program or something?
Whatever something said is
I thought maybe the voice problems you were having were you were also trying to mask your voice there. So I didn't know.
Let me say, I am the phantom behind the Compact Committee.
Excellent, excellently well. Well, to whoever said it about the meaningful work, that's really my point. I do think that the way that we're organized and structured logistically really is a barrier to the IBCC doing very much that's meaningful, Dan. I gotta be honest. Even when we look at our roundtable, we get together every other month. We spend 3.5 or 4 hours. That is mostly about digesting work that has been done between meetings, that is reported on. You can't get 33 people to understand every grant. You can't get 33 people to understand every outreach. You can't get 33 people to understand the implications and nuances of demand management. So those standing committees do a lot of work in between meetings and take that to the roundtable, and that has been very productive at Yampa White Green. So my suggestion, or it's not really even a suggestion, but my concept would be that we figure out, once we get those topics, how 4 or 5 of us can be the conduit from our basin into a subcommittee, and we can digest those and work on them maybe in a couple of meetings in between each IBCC meeting, so that when we get to the IBCC, we have preparatory work done, and we can use our 4 hours in a more meaningful way. And that, I know no one needs another job, but for the IBCC to really do its job, I don't think 3-4 hour meetings a year are going to accomplish much.
If I understand it, Jeff, it's that one way to get the IBCC more engaged is through the use of the identification of topics and the use of subcommittees that would do work in between, and that way that you could cover more ground in that regard. Yeah. Okay.
That's exactly it.
Sean, you've had your hand up.
Yeah, I think there was.
Yeah, we're gonna go back and forth.
I wanted to give the virtual.
You get something for showing up.
Yes.
I got the burrito. I'm gonna perhaps lift up a little bit and kind of reflect on the charter, which is sort of my go-to of when the question gets asked, what are we here to do? Well, what did the others envision? And I tended to focus on section 4, which is the roles of the committee. And it says the IBCC will, and has 6 points. And I highlighted 3 of the 6 areas. Number 1 says provide a forum, blah, 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 and then goes on to say a vision for statewide water negotiations. Perhaps this was the strategic framework that got developed. Perhaps it's what Director Gibbs described as kind of our past accomplishments. Perhaps this is kind of the constant struggle around relationships with the formal entities such as CWCB or DNR or other established entities. I find myself asking, what does negotiations mean? Is that a collaborative approach on climate change, for example? If we build some consensus around what that means to the state, is that a negotiation, or are we actually talking a hardened negotiation of, say, bringing water from the west slope to the east slope? Is it developing support around what Melly proposed around big river issues, and is that a negotiation? So I think having some clarity amongst us is how do we define that today might be helpful in answering the question of what is it that we're supposed to be doing. The other one that I highlighted is number 3. It says assist in finding resources. And I found myself asking, is that financial resources, human resources, water resources? And then it begs the question of, have we done that? Have we assisted the roundtables with finding those resources? And if it's financial resources, maybe that all took place through the water plan grants and whatnot. But again, asking ourselves that question of whether we have served that role. The next one I focused on was number 5, which says guide the process, and goes on to say that creates incentives for successful deliberations, agreements, and their implementation. And once again, ask myself, have we done that? Have we created the incentives? And of course, what exactly does that mean? Is that in the framework? Are there incentives there? Is that the grant program again? If you marry up your values to the water plan, then you receive funding. And have we served our role in that capacity? So I really haven't been on since the beginning. I know some of you have, but in my entire time of being the IBCC, this question has always been asked. What are we doing and how are we doing it? And I think Melly did a good job of trying to create the distinction in some of those questions that were pulled on of whether we're being asked to talk about something, whether we're asked to learn about something, or whether we're being asked to act on something. And I think having that discussion of are we a forum and are just to gather information or spew out information, that's a different role than acting and creating action. And I would suggest that the roles of the committee in those 3 areas that I highlighted are actually action. And I'm now asking, has that been done? And I don't have the answer, and perhaps others do. I think what we heard this morning from Director Gibbs was a challenge to act. And so perhaps those 3 areas could be a next topic of discussion for the IBCC, and we could reflect on history and know whether we've acted on those 3 areas. Maybe there's other areas that I didn't highlight that ought to be highlighted, but I would suggest this. I think we should develop a 5-year work plan, like any organizations, or a 2-year work plan, or maybe only in terms of elections. I don't know what that is, but really put something together that we could agree to on the IBCC is this is what we're going to focus on. And I know that's been attempted at different times. I don't know that it's made the distinction of whether it's talking, learning, or acting. And I think that would be helpful for us. And I would suggest that that work plan start with the 3 areas that I highlighted. Is we could create a vision for statewide water negotiations and define what that means. And again, reflect on history, and perhaps that's been already done. We could create a guidebook for what those resources are that the IBCC was asked to assist in finding. And then we could go on to develop those incentives for implementing an agreement between the basins. And that quote unquote agreement, again, could be climate change, for example, and develop incentives around coming to an agreement on that between the basins. Thanks.
Yeah, no, I think that's helpful, and sort of with the evaluation of what you've been accomplished, distinguishing between talking, learning, acting, your suggestion about creating a 5-year or a work plan with strategic action items that outline those 3 pieces as sort of how you would see this group moving toward something that's meaningful and clear.
Yeah, I'll add one more thing. I think the danger we fall into with the polling is we asked water people to what topics are they most geeky about. And you noticed, I mean, we're splitting hairs like 1/10 of a point if that's a higher priority. I don't know that we're going to say no to any of them. And so that's what caused me to move back and say, okay, what were we supposed to geek out on? And I think these are what we're supposed to geek out on.
Good, thank you. Barbara Vasquez.
Yes, I'm very glad you chose the in-person speaker first, because the very thoughtful analysis of who we are, what we're supposed to be doing was very helpful for me. I've only been an IBCC rep for about 2.5 years. But in the interest of focusing on action, I have a couple of topics I wanted to bring up very quickly. And Dan, with you taking over the IBCC, it is very apparent that there's a power here to drive interagency or sub-agency coordination that may be of value to roundtables. And one example I have picks up on the data gaps that were mentioned earlier. For example, in the North Platte Basin, we've discussed ad nauseum the need for additional gauging so that we have enough data. And indeed, during the BIP discussions talking about stream management plans, although the roundtable members in general were less than enthusiastic about the idea of that, the issue of not having gauging data to know how much water we have where. And when we brought this up, particularly with Aaron Light in the room, the issue between capital money, which we could get through a WSRF grant to install a gauge, and operating and maintenance money, which would fall to DWR, became the problem. So we proposed to solicit a grant application to install gauges, and we would get the feedback, yeah, but who's going to operate them and who's going to maintain them? And there was no ability to coordinate that capital versus operational dollar question. So there's one. The other, more broadly speaking, has to do with climate change and forest health. So my understanding is we're looking at the legislation that has been passed and the desire for implementation to protect streams, rivers, reservoirs, et cetera, and infrastructure is really focused on removing trees, either dead or live. And my question is philosophical one: where are the sideboards and the balancing act between not cutting live trees because they serve as a carbon sink relative to climate change, and removing dead trees either from wildfire or beetle kill to minimize danger of having been burned? And I believe it was just 2 years ago, Cwcb passed their first grant for prophylactic tree removal to protect a reservoir should there be a fire. So we're trying to get ahead of ourselves. It's almost like amputating a body part for fear you're going to get cancer. And that balance on climate change is a multi-agency and difficult balancing act to approach. So just two questions to land in this discussion.
Great, thank you. So the gauging piece and then climate change and forest health, you know, it's interesting what Chris Sturm was talking about, which with wildfire ready watersheds. And, you know, I guess one of the things that I thought I heard, or maybe I thought myself, which is what's the role that IBCC could play in terms of helping to connect in implementation with local communities? Does IBCC have a role to play in that? And I think some of your questions around remote tree removals and, you know, this balance between carbon and carbon sequestration and fire and that balance and that piece comes up. So I don't know if others have thoughts on that, but Lisa, Darling, you're next. Thank you, Barbara.
I put my hand down because I was getting tired.
Well, it must be all the sun.
Because you have a margarita in your hand.
So I've been trying to put together these pieces and parts of what I think I'm hearing, and that was really super helpful, Sean, about kind of going into sort of what our roles are. But what Jeff was saying kind of resonated in terms of picking committees for topics. So let me see if this is kind of half-baked, but let me see if I can explain. So we've got a couple of topics that it seems is of great interest: forest health, drought, and climate change. You know, we're supposed to be leaders on a roundtable level. You know, we come together and we share information, but we're really leaders on a roundtable level, right? So what if we decided to kind of do what Jeff was talking about, have these groups forming more on the, you know, the IBCC reps leading these conversations, but more on a basin roundtable level, right? And going across the basins. So if you used me and forest health, I would set up a group or subcommittee to have that conversation, inviting others from other basins, and kind of try to create that tie with the basin dialogue that we've been trying to achieve. And then when we come together, one of the difficult issues, you know, Melly, I hear what you're saying about, you know, the big river issues and wanting to be part of that conversation. But it seems like if we meet 2 or 3 times a year, we're always thinking, we're always cogitating. We're not talking about a plan or results or a white paper or an action plan. What if we took our time once or twice a year to bring together these committee report outs on these issues that we've identified, right? And try to create that leadership, IBCC leadership on the roundtable level, and maybe stop thinking of ourselves so much as a group that just gets together and has deep thinks, right? I don't know how that fits in with what Sean was saying, because Sean, when you're talking negotiation, it always sort of frightens people, I think, because that sounds huge and big, and negotiations about what and what commitments are you talking about? So I'm thinking real topics with real results, with real leadership, that we can come back together and we can share dialogue like we did this morning. The Basin Roundtable dialogue this morning, I thought was great. And I'd love to see more of that than spinning our wheels on thinking through a topic and never reaching any sort of conclusions. So does that make sense? There's not a reaction button that's like eye roll, I don't think. So I don't think you guys can do that. But that's what I'm kind of trying to think through, is a practical way that we can actually bring leadership to bear on a roundtable level. Then when we bring it together, we're coalescing a picture of where we want the state to go in the future.
So it's more than the think tank, it's sort of the do tank, in the sense of showing IBCC leadership around some of these topics and really engaging the roundtable at the roundtable level, and then bringing that feedback, those plans, those ideas, actions back to the group. That's sort of the idea?
That's the idea. And then letting it germinate when we get together, almost like a summit. Like we do this mind dump of where we see we could actually make good progress, and then we try to germinate it throughout the state to those who perhaps weren't involved in the committee discussion. But yes, thank you, Jonathan. That was a much better summary than I tried to do. So yes, thank you.
Paul, I think you have your hand up, and then I'll start to look at others. Paul, please.
Thank you. I really appreciate the conversation from everybody. I think everybody brings a different point to this. It's fantastic. I also wanted to mention on top of the rest of the conversation, though, is that we seem that we're in this time of extraordinary funding opportunities. Each basin has recently completed, their updated BIP. I worry capacity within our state to get these projects in the ground. Many of the things that we talk about, the climate change, water scarcity, all these other topics that are there, we have identified, statewide in many basins, projects and solutions for these that currently either have funding gaps or aren't quite ready to go. And I see it as a role potentially of the IBCC to help our roundtables coordinate to get these projects done for success in a current time that we live. The glass half full side of things is that projects that I've personally seen, participated in, worked on the state, we're making some good impacts living in the world that we're living in. But I just want to make sure that with current opportunities, that it's not just an IBCC that has the tough conversations, but it's the IBCC that, as Sean pointed out, for point topic number 3, assist in finding resources to enable roundtables to develop basin-wide visions. In order to achieve that, it's going to cross over from basin to basin to happen. Thank you.
Yeah, and I guess I'm thinking about Nate's presentation and your, sort of the capacity gap and the role that the IBCC could play in terms of helping to close that gap, to bring funding, to help, move some of these topics forward. And wondering, Aaron, you've got your card up.
I was just going to agree with that. I think that I was talking to Nate at the break, and all of these opportunities for funding are, at least for me, like slowly coalescing, but still far from being fully coalesced. But if there is a forum for basins to more directly get their needs, their opportunities to make DNR, I don't know if it's necessary. Maybe the roundtables could do it themselves just fine, but if it's a way for the IBCC to help elevate that and bring together that it's not just, the Colorado needs this and the South Platte needs this, but that as a state, there are, there was a great quote somewhere in there about, we're all in this together message that investment into water is critical. And there's investment that's needed for all types of projects, just like the water plans about, co-equal investments in, storage and rivers and agriculture in cities, making sure that a similar theme comes across to I'm frankly never sure who the forum is, to the governor, to the delegation, to the bureau, whatever it is, to say the IBCC is a representative agency, or not an agency, representative think tank group, do tank, from throughout Colorado, pointing out how important these projects are and then providing connection to the roundtable.
Yeah, I wonder. Go ahead, please.
Sorry, just to add to this, is a very specific project. I mean, take a look at Windy Gap Connectivity Channel, for example. You know, Melly has been working on this for how long of your career? You came out of sabbatical to go to a meeting yesterday and today. I mean, there are projects of statewide significance that already create this interbasin dialogue, that already bring in partners all over the place that we've struggled to receive funding for, you know, working on for a decade. And that is part of a solution for what has happened with the Upper Colorado River over a period of time. So, I mean, there are real life examples of this that I think that we can have a role in.
Yeah, I guess just, you know, thinking out loud here, I'm wondering if, in terms of building off of Lisa's idea, whether, you know, the funding and the IBCC funding and sort of funding opportunities could be, you know, something that would be actionable, and it could be an idea that to help to advance that forward. I'm just speculating here. Pat, I think you're up. Pat Wells, and then by the way, we're just to do a time check. We're about 10 minutes past noon. Just hoping that folks have a few more minutes, if that's okay.
Great. Well, thank you. Listening to this conversation, I'm kind of reflecting on some other hallway conversations I've had over the years, and I'm thinking about a couple I had specifically with Greg Johnson when he was at CWCB. My thought, and I guess we would have to see if it's kind of within the bylaws or not, but at the end of the day, I think we all want to be a resource to the state of Colorado, our individual basins, and to DNR to help solve tough problems and challenges. And I don't know if it makes more sense for us to do what Sean said of let's identify what we think the top challenges are and tackle those, or I guess more in line with a lot of the other water boards I work on, or even here at Colorado Springs Utilities, we have a policy advisory committee that goes and investigates things and comes up with recommendations and is given, you know, kind of, they work on assignments of tough things for our utilities board. And I don't know why, you know, at least a component of our role couldn't be Director Gibbs giving us a tough challenge, or the CWCB board saying, can someone, we have this problem we need to solve. Can you tell us how to solve it? And if you can get consensus, can you go out to your roundtables and do public process around the solution that you think you've found? And can you report back to CWCB on a statewide think tank or do tank of water experts has reached consensus on XYZ, whatever problem it is that maybe CWCB or DNR or others are struggling with. And they've actually gone out and vetted it with the roundtables, and they like 70% of this. The other 30% is hard, but we've found, you know, 70% of the problem. So I guess I've heard a lot of discussions in recent meetings about, you know, we've kind of got our own statutory authority. We're independent from CWCB and DNR, but I don't know that that's the right approach in all circumstances. I would like to actually increase the coordination with CWCB of, you know, where they may actually, we could dialogue on, here's an issue we're struggling with statewide, and you guys either go out and tell us how to fix it, tell us, you know, try to reach consensus on this and whatever. And I think we've got a good start with some of these topics we've discussed, but that may just be a little more of a, I guess, my take on how we could potentially be useful and more targeted and focused as a body of experts.
And if I'm understanding that, it's that creating something akin to a policy advisory committee that's given, a task and comes with recommendations in coordination with Director Gibbs and the board itself, and in that sense, that to you sounds like a meaningful role that you could play around some of these, that the IBCC could play in this. Am I getting that right?
Yeah, I think that's got some potential.
Okay, thanks. Al, you're up. And then I want to check to see who else from the IBCC has yet to weigh in on this. And Al, go ahead.
I guess Patrick hit on a lot of it, of what I was going to say, but to me, with the interrelationship of, I'll say, the top 3 or 4 issues that the surveys have identified, to me, taking, I'll say, Lisa's approach of some subcommittees or whatever we want to call them, putting together the information that is available and then making recommendations to that the IBCC can get together on, and then make recommendations to the CWCB would be, I'll say, a viable approach. And kind of using a local analogy from down here, like the Planning Commission evaluates a given project and makes their recommendation to what the Board of County Commissioners are going to decide. So I think getting that collective input on a given issue, be it forest health, big river issues, I mean, they're all interrelated. So to a certain extent, I'm not sure how we can, quote, choose one over the other, but I think somewhat taking there again, Lisa's approach of committees working in between meetings and making recommendations so we can come to consensus. So that combined with Patrick's approach, that's all I have.
Nice. With just an observation here is that you've really taken Director Gibbs, challenge to, participate and engage here. I mean, I think that's what you're talking about. If in fact that's the direction that you're headed in, that this looks like work to me, right? It looks like meaningful work associated with that and creating recommendations, working with the roundtables, vetting ideas, those types of things. And so it's just an observation there that that from a number of your comments. I wonder if other IBCC members, before we kind of put a cap on this discussion, is there anything that's been left unsaid about what will be a meaningful role for the IBCC to play, that, something that specifically that you think that might work, that to put in the hopper for consideration? Thoughts on that from other members that have yet to add anything? Greg, others on the screen?
So I'd like to make just a short comment. I've been on the IBCC since its inception, 17 years. I didn't realize it was that long. What's happened is we have become mentally lazy as a group. If you look at our agendas recently, we're like mushrooms. We're just being fed stuff that some staff member at CWCB thinks we ought to hear about. And we haven't been proactive in setting our own agenda. I just think we've got, and I agree with Lisa, we're going to have to start doing a little more heavy lifting outside of the few little meetings that we get to have each year. But we've got to become proactive in charting our own course.
So there again, I think it's one of those, one of the themes that I hear is proactivity and about engaging more specifically, particularly outside of meetings. Tom Gray, you've got, I think you've got the last comment.
Oh, good. It's always good to be the last one to weigh in, isn't it? I don't have anything new to add, but I kind of want to, I guess, add to what some others have said. To me, the main thing right now is with climate change and drought, we all recognize, I think the elephant in the room is that we have less water to use in the state. And that means we're going to need to figure out how to reduce the amount of water we use Will there be winners and losers? That's the sticky, hard subjects that we avoid, I think. We like to talk about big, broad subjects, but I think we need to get to the particulars. I think the IBCC connected to the roundtables is the perfect conduit between the state and the negotiations and conversations that need to happen within the basins on how using less water is going to happen. And break it down into some bite-sized chunks with subcommittees, take it back to your roundtables and bring it back a piece at a time, whether it's, if you're talking demand management, what does voluntary mean? And how would that play out in reducing consumptive use around the state? This is an example. That's just all I can think of as an example. But I think I've heard several say we need to do some action. And I like the various ways Jeff and Andy and Sean brought it out, just adding to it. I think for me, that's what we need to do. Thanks.
Anything else? Turn it over to Gibbs.
Yeah, great. Well, thanks, Jonathan. Also, thanks, Emily, as well for your help with this. I have a couple pages of notes, which is absolutely amazing. I went in feeling pretty optimistic, honestly, and folks that know me know that's kind of my style. I always hope for the best. Sometimes plan for the worst, but I do that as well. But I want to answer that question though too, that a lot of folks were asking, and I think like when I look at, and I have my cheat sheet here of can we put this slide up? The one where it's more inclusive and it's not taking things out of the box or whatever. You can all see that. Should we make it bigger?
Dan, what's wrong with your eyes? Come on, man.
Boy, you asked a lot, Dan.
So anyways, I mean,
there we go.
Everyone has just amazing thoughts, and I love like picking and pulling from almost everyone that has like these great concepts. But what I'm just kind of thinking about, like what we have in front of us, like right now, and I was a former elected official, and I used to like scrape for $1 million for forest health issues. And now I'm looking at Nate, and we're expecting $1.2 billion for water infrastructure in Colorado. We have 79 to 80 million or so that was just announced by Senator Bennett and Senator Hickenlooper. We have, what did I say earlier? The COSWAP program has 17.5 million. We have furworm program, 8 million. We have, it's going to be decided in the near future, X amount of money just for forest health and watershed health alone. I almost think like you almost use like looking at Andy, I'm just like climate as the umbrella, but think how many things, and I'm super jazzed about this, fit underneath this, so climate. And Nate, correct me if I'm wrong, because I know you're going to be neck deep in all this, but that's the big picture that also falls within, we need to get projects off the ground around the state. We want to be targeted. IBCC, in my opinion, can play a really critical role in making sure we get the right landscapes, the right location, right pace done. Guess what? To get anything done, you need regional planning. It's not just the state saying, here's a bunch of money, you get it done. So we need people on the ground that can act, working. Guess what? Funding a lot from the feds, but funding from the state too, that can work locally. Roundtable direction, we're working on that. We're working on that. We're not quite there, but we're moving in that direction. Communication, Pepo, all the amazing work, Lisa and all the kind of regional Pepo liaisons, they're kicking butt. What about some real money to put towards that and help get local people conservation? This is all, this is climate conservation. We're talking the same thing, and have this all tie in to the water plan that whether we like it or not, we have to get the plan on the governor's desk by December at some point, 2022. So anyways, I know we can't tackle everything here, but I feel like we could tackle a whole bunch of these issues and tie it into kind of the climate umbrella. And to everyone's point, like, and I was chatting with a bunch of folks, you know, before this meeting too, like no one, like I mentioned that I'm so busy, and I am, and you're all busy too, so I don't want to waste anyone's time. But I want to make sure we're getting done to work, that we're charging you to like help us get things done in your basin. And this could be one way that we use this once in a lifetime opportunity, potentially. I'm not saying we have to run with this, but you know, as that avenue to check off a whole bunch of boxes that we know are really important to Colorado, and not just, and these are the themes too, when I look through the BIPs, you know, the climate, the, you know, the drought, the forest health, you know, these are bubbling up. These are common themes. Yeah, river issues, always important. Demand management, important. Like all these are important, you know, but where can we find that sweet spot to come together? And I don't know, that's why I think we have this very unique opportunity. I don't know, Nate, do you want to chime in on anything I'm missing about this grand scheme of funding, like landing on our desk, more or less?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think you're missing anything. I think the IBCC is like incredibly well positioned to help coordinate this effort, and having a whole lot of money to chase lights a fire and start or continue addressing a lot of these issues. And I agree that like so many are tied together, and this funding just provides such a great opportunity to address them.
Aaron?
So Sean mentioned that we should create a work plan, and I saw Ken has suggested subcommittees, which I think could fit together, but I'd be really interested to look at the notes from the meeting, and maybe a subcommittee could be created to try and turn that into a work plan, even if it's for a year, whatever it is, just to start. I think that would be worthwhile, because you know, we keep having this conversation. In 2020, we had a version of it. That's the slide. 2021, we had a different version of it. To at least try to put something on paper to say, here are the outputs we're expecting to accomplish over the next whatever time period, I think would be really useful. Some of it could be focused around funding. There's other elements that were brought up, but I'd love to put that on paper, because then we won't have the question of like, well, what do we do? What have we accomplished there? We can actually tie it specifically to the statute and identify if there are things that, for those of you that have been on this committee since it was started, say, yeah, we accomplished, our intention was, you talk about legislative intent, but like committee intent, our intention in creating this was to meet the statutory definition here. I think that would be really worthwhile. And obviously it would require some work between now and June, I guess. But I think I would welcome that, because otherwise we'll come back in June and have the same conversation and talk about the water plan, which I think we should talk about, like responding to that. But like, let's be ready. And that would be one of the elements. In June, we're also, our plan is to, I don't know what kind of response is going to be appropriate, but I think it'd be worthwhile. I'm happy to volunteer to be on that work planning subcommittee. I'm not sure if that's the kind of I'm looking at the comments on the screen, if that's the kind of subcommittee people have in mind, but I think we should put something on paper.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. I'd love to serve with you on that committee. And you know, anyone else, raise your hand if you want to be on a subcommittee to pull some of these concepts together to really look at, you know, where are we looking in a couple of years? You know, what are our deliverables? What are we, and this is not for the faint of the heart, but you know, I'll make the commitment myself to be a part of that. And I want to get a sense of, you know, who in this room, you know, Sean will be a part of it. Sean, you want to co-chair?
There's mushrooms.
Sean, you co-chair that with Aaron? You and Aaron co-chair that?
Sure.
Get some hands on it.
Yeah.
And then also, I don't know if there are comments, but folks that are also willing, are you commenting that you want to serve on that committee as well? Okay, wonderful. Let's capture, do we need to take a photo, or you can just tell?
It's recorded.
Oh, okay, wonderful. Okay. Yeah, and not everyone needs to do that, but this is really exciting work. And again, like we're trying to get from like not wasting your time. Yeah, Paul. Not wasting your time to like really getting some meaningful work done, and we're gonna get it done. Okay. So I appreciate you all stepping up. Okay, well with that, you know, we have a plan to move forward to figure out a plan. And I think that's really wonderful, honestly. And you know, I know we're a little bit behind schedule, so I just want to wrap up by thanking everyone, really, for those in this room that, I don't want to say you risked your life to get here, but the roads were not so great this morning. Hopefully they're better. And I know a lot of folks that were there virtually too, whether it's like responsibilities on the farm or Lisa having margaritas on the beach or, around, not everyone can make it. And I would prefer, again, doing these meetings in person. I think this is going to be the most meaningful and we're going to get to know each other more. And we're going to tackle these challenging topics. But again, I really appreciate your willingness to step up to be a part of this. Look forward to seeing you all in Summit County. Put on your calendar June 30th. We have the Community and Senior Center reserved, and we're going to plan some other fun activities while you're in my backyard. And maybe we will go to my house possibly for a party or something. But thanks so much. And for the folks that raise your hand, we'll get an email out to you to set up this subcommittee to really work on this work plan moving forward. So did I miss anything before we adjourn? Okay. Is everyone motivated as much as me? Yeah? Yeah, we're all in it? Yes. Okay. Thanks, everyone. I really appreciate it.
Keep warm.
Yep, thanks. Well, and also, the folks that are still here too, thank you to Russ, Viola, Vivian, Kelly, thanks so much, Amy, Kat, let's give all of them a round of applause. Put this together. Okay.
And if anybody wants to sit here and eat, they're welcome to.
Okay.
You don't have to be out of meeting.
Yeah.